all over the world.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. And we've got 5 commissioners and 2 missing. Commissioners Moisen and Brezak. Let's start with the Planning Commission meetings minutes from last time. Anyone have any changes or comments?
None. I'll move to accept the minutes as drafted.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
I abstained because I wasn't here.
Oh, you did. 1 abstention. So 1, 2, 3, 4 still passes. Okay. So we need to elect a new chair.
What about decisions?
Public comment.
Oh, we do that
The agenda.
here? Or here?
Oh,
Before.
oh,
All
it
right.
should be
Public comment now, David?
For anything not on
Do
the
we start
agenda?
discuss?
Anything which is not on the agenda.
We managed not to lose it from the agenda.
Is there any public comment on a matter that is not before us on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to the first discussion item.
Are you, since you're acting chair, are you willing to accept nominations?
I am.
I would nominate Ronit Posner as chair of the Planning Commission.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Great.
And are you looking for a nomination for vice chair?
I was going to even throw one out.
Okay.
I was going to throw out a nomination for Malka as vice chair.
And I'd second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes.
I guess
Boy,
my
that
only
was
comment would be,
controversial.
We have girls' rule.
Malka takes time off during the year
Yes.
to go to her other venue. So we can't have both of you be gone at the same time.
Correct.
Malka,
We'll coordinate.
Hit me.
you'll coordinate? I don't think so. I mean, she goes when she goes, right?
No, we'll coordinate.
Okay.
We'll work it
We'll
out.
coordinate.
But if you, I'm
Is this a
saying,
matter of
Ronit
discussion?
gets sick or something, you have a
Don't
family
get
issue.
sick on me. Sure you don't.
And then what happens?
We have to go to something like John, which is
That's
scraping the bottom of the barrel.
That's the bottom of the barrel. We'd
All right.
probably go to
All
Phoebe
right.
or Ken.
We'll figure that out. We'll cross that bridge.
Okay.
Me too.
Just don't get sick.
Turning to the next item of discussion, the public parking plaza reconfiguration policy.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. This item before you, this was considered by the City Council back in March, on March 25th. This was kind of an offshoot of the parking management plan that was adopted last year. There was discussion, and the council made it a priority to look at developing a policy for to consider private proposals to restripe public plazas in order to gain additional spaces. And then they discussed several high-level questions in terms of who gets access to those spaces, what are the basic parameters, and how are they allocated. And so at that meeting, they provided several recommendations and directed staff to develop a policy to encompass those and to bring it back to the PTC for discussion and a recommendation. And so before you tonight is a draft policy for public plaza reconfiguration if a private developer wishes to move forward with a proposal. So overall, that's included in Attachment A. I am available if you have any questions. Really the big issue with this was discussing the parking stall width. There was discussion whether it should be 9 feet or whether it should be less, and ultimately the City Council recommended that parking stalls should have a minimum width of 9 feet. Based on that, the parking management plan did evaluate restriping and how many spaces you could gain, whether you restriped with an 8.5 foot wide stall or a 9 foot wide stall. And included in the staff report is a summary. As you can see, with a 9 foot wide stall, each plaza has relatively few new spaces that could be gained. Just kind of looking at the rundown, Plaza 1 ranging from 2 to 6 depending on the configuration. plazas.
Wait, Zach, this is with the 9-foot stall?
This is with the 9-foot stall.
Okay.
And if you look at it, Appendix 4A in the parking management plan went through 3 different configuration options, both with an 8-foot wide or 8.5-foot wide and a 9-foot wide stall, and provided estimates of how many spaces you could gain with each of those. And really, you're looking at approximately 76 spaces for all of the plazas, but relatively few for each individual plaza. So that is something to definitely factor in. Also, depending on where the utilities get undergrounded, there'll be additional vaults that are needed. Landscaping and other elements could affect that as well. However, we still do have that policy in place, and we do want to move forward and establish parameters. If a private developer does wish to move forward and propose a reconfiguration, we do want to have parameters in place. So with that concludes my staff report. We also did receive a public comment, and so that was forwarded to you earlier this week, and it is also in the dais in front of you. And overall, staff can reply to any one of those individual comments if Commission has questions. In general, the intent of this policy is not to provide design-level specifics at this time, but rather to establish overarching parameters and expectations so that if and when a proposal is submitted, we have some parameters to work by. So that would be our general position, is that a lot of these comments were very design-specific, and without further evaluation and looking at a specific proposal, it may not be appropriate to unnecessarily confine or define certain expectations, and maybe there's other solutions out there that we're not yet aware of. So really, the focus would be the basic parameters: parking stall size, utility undergrounding, landscaping, allocation of the spaces. That's really what the policy is attempting to provide parameters for.
Can you go back and tell me what the standard width is for a parking space for a standard size car?
A standard in Los Altos, our Unistall, our universal parking stall size is 9 feet wide by 18 feet in depth.
Okay.
And that's this policy.
And how many more parking stalls could you get if you were to have gone to 8.5 feet? You know?
It would definitely be more. There's specifics. It looks like if you do an 8.5-foot wide stall, it looks like you could gain 50 or so more in
50? That seems unreasonable.
for all 9 plazas. Also, it should be noted, Plaza 9, since it's only partially owned by the city, would be excluded from this policy. This policy would just affect parking plazas that the city fully owns. But if you look at Appendix 4A, it talks about the number of stalls you could get with a 9-foot wide space and with an 8.5-foot wide space, and it estimates the total. This is just the gross total of 1,091 for all the plazas, and if you go to 8.5-foot wide, you're up to 1,140. So that's 51 additional spaces.
49,
Or 49.
yeah.
Somewhere in there. But so according to this, obviously, these are just approximate, and once you get to design level for each individual plaza, those numbers could be adjusted.
Okay.
So the goal for us is to create a policy about the parking structures, not necessarily how many spaces will be created or not created, just the overall policy. Is that what
It
we're
would be to
hearing?
make a recommendation on the overall policy, the draft of which is included
Right.
in Attachment A. It wouldn't be a parking structure. This is specifically for private proposals to restripe or reconfigure a public plaza.
Right, and then my question, kind of following up with Ken, is there a state standard for width of parking? I mean, I know Los Altos is 9 feet, and I know the city council likes that, but is there like a standard width of a parking structure from the state of California, or is there some code that dictates that, or do we just pull that out of the air to say, 9 feet seems like a reasonable size?
There's a lot of different sizes that have been used, and you can even go around Los Altos and find varying dimensions. I know the office building over at 5150 El Camino, right at Rangsdorf, they actually have some 7.5-foot wide and 8-foot wide, and those we actually get complaints about because you literally can't open your doors when you get in there. But there isn't a state standard. It's up to every jurisdiction to establish best practices.
Okay.
Yeah, the ones behind Pete's, those are, there's used to be the Green Cleaners and the Daily Method or whatever it is, that block of buildings there. Those are are smaller stalls, and you really notice it.
And if you go over to the Safeway, the new Safeway over at the San Antonio Center, those are 9-foot wide stalls. I
Right.
went over there and measured, and those are still tight when you get in and out in a perpendicular setting, driving in and out. I don't
Right.
know the width of the drive aisle. It might be a little bit narrower than Los Altos standards. Our standard is a 26-foot wide drive aisle, and
think
we have
that's
in
a
some
20.
cases looked at 24 and 25 feet. In looking at it, it looked like those drive aisles were in the 23 to 25 range. So that definitely made it a little bit tighter as well.
I believe the parking at the ground level on Safeway is the 24 by 9, the distance between the aisles, and then the ones upstairs are wider.
I have a few questions. Is there going to be a requirement that in order for someone to proceed, they have to have a project before the city that is underparked, so that we wouldn't have a situation where a developer who wants to hold 15 spots and then sell it to the highest bidder has a couple $1 million to spare, decides I'm going to do one of these. I don't have a project.
Generally, we would, and we can clarify that in the policy if necessary. The goal would be that there is a project in mind. However, we would imagine that this would be a two-step process where the reconfiguration of a plaza comes first, because obviously the project would be contingent on if it's approved. And then the timing of it could be adjusted. But the idea would be that there is a project in mind. However, the plaza reconfiguration would come first and be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and Council. Once it's approved, then there's an additional number of spaces that could then be applied to the project, because really you need to know those number of spaces in order for the project to be fully considered once it comes through the same development review process.
So I guess I'm trying to understand how you would determine first come, first serve. If you have a few people that come to you, I imagine there's going to be one that will look most economical. And when you break these down, and you may have 2 or 3 people who want to do that one. So if they don't have a project that has been substantially reviewed or gone through the process, who's first? The first person to come to you with the idea, or first person? How do you see this? How do you see this working?
This is what we're basing this off the direction from council, which they said they wanted a first come first serve approach. So in our mind, that would be first person to get an application in that's complete, that they would be first in line.
Okay. So even if that application then gets paralyzed for a year or two, and someone that started a month later maybe kind of speeds through with a simpler project, that first application, because it's dated, I mean, that's going to be the standard?
Based off the direction from council, that is how we would interpret that.
Okay. Another thought I had, the estimate of the total cost was 8.3 with a average price of 110. Did the report, I didn't have the report when I was reviewing this. Does the report estimate what each of these different plazas would cost?
It does, and they vary. And in some plazas, you're looking at $300,000 or $400,000.
Okay.
And some you're looking at closer to $80,000. But as you can see, if you look at the breakdown, given the relatively few number of spaces per plaza, you are going to get a pretty high cost per space in any single plaza, because really the way you get that down is by gaining a significant additional number of stalls. And in all of these plazas, really the only plaza that had a potential that was even in double digits, or there was 2, there was plazas 3 and plazas 4, but as you can see, it was 0 to 17 or 0 to 13, so obviously those would probably be the lowest cost plazas to reconfigure.
And what were the costs of those two, the 3 and 4? Because those were the 2 that seemed to me the obvious first choice, regardless of how many spots you needed. You would, in my mind, build those and then hold on to the others, and presumably sell them. Is there anything preventing that from happening? I mean, could someone then sell, if they build it for $75,000, then sell it for $150,000?
Well, the goal of this policy isn't to accumulate spaces and then resell them. It's to develop additional spaces that can be used toward a specific project.
Yeah, but
So
I think,
if we
I think
want
what
to-
Ronita is saying is that she wants to make sure that people don't game the system. I think that's her point. Not that the policy itself isn't clear, but there may be a loophole where someone could game the system.
But how would you do that? Like if there's a
Well,
particular project
you-
and these spaces are designated for that project,
So
and somebody else comes in, how would,
the way I read this is first come, first serve.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, someone has a project and they need 3 spots.
Mm-hmm.
They identify the lot, 3 or 4, that has the lowest price per spot.
Mm-hmm.
They present a plan. They use their 3, 4 spots. They then have the ability to allocate the other spots, as it says here, to someone else.
yeah, but the
And
city-
when and if that person needs it, they are holding those spots, and
So-
they can give it to that person for the price that it cost them,
So,
or they could.
I have
If
a
you look at
question.
parking stall allocation number 2, it says if there are any parking spaces created above and beyond what the developer needs to meet their project parking demand, the surplus parking may be allocated to a nearby property per approval by the city council. So the allocation or redistribution of those spaces still, the power of that still rests with the city council. Those wouldn't become the property of a given developer.
So are we having conversation or questions? That's what I was going to ask. Because I mean, I like this topic, but I
Okay.
want to, but I think it's.
Those were questions that turned into conversation.
Yeah.
we can open public hearing.
Yeah, why don't we open public hearing and start with Chris Lafka, please.
Following up.
Hey, first, I just want to emphasize that I'm here to for reporting purposes for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but the comments that I have on this issue are just my personal opinions.
Could you please state your name and address?
I am Chris Halavka, HLAV as in Victor, KA, and I live on Oak Avenue. And I wrote down my email address on the card. But I can also be reached. Anyway, my general concern here, and I know it's probably somewhat different with in downtown and working with commercial property, but I have some concerns, I guess, about control of public property when some investments have been made by a member of the public rather than the city. Get extra time?
No.
Okay, and part of this comes, I guess, because I have dealt with bicycle issues in residential areas and some projects on the streets that sometimes there's some difficulties because with developing a project and it can't be you have to take in consideration the property owner behind the frontage. It's typically in a residential area, it's the first 10 feet. But often people landscape it, they put fences there and things like that. And then if the city wants to do something like in a recent project, widen the sidewalk at a corner and put in a bulb out, there had to be negotiations between the city and a staff member and the property owner on that corner. So I think that it's, there's some potential with this kind of policy and the way it's carried out, that the same things may occur where there has, if right now you're talking about new development, but okay, somebody puts in, restripes a plaza, and then 10 years later the property changes hands, or the city wants to do something, and then there are these issues between and dealings between the city and the property owner. So I think that's just something to think about. It may be a little easier with commercial just because there are some differences in the nature of things that when the property is bought, that the new owner may be more cognizant of where the division is. But anyway, it could still be an issue. I had some comments about item 4 and landscaping and irrigation. I think some of it's just a matter of wording, and maybe I should just forward my comments to David Cornfield, and he can consider that in addition to whatever comments you guys have. One thing I was concerned about is if you're restriping and the effects on existing trees, it seems like the desire is, when possible, to retain existing trees in the plazas, and if there's changes to the dirt around them, how it would affect the health of the tree. But that's pretty much it. Bye.
Thank you. I'm going to call Bill Maston next, please.
This is just to make it a little easier for you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Bill Masson, local architect. I just want to start by saying that I have a lot of experience in this, only in that since 1992 I've been on the similar committee in Mountain View regarding parking. And we've learned a lot of things from that, and I was hoping I could pass a few of them on to you that could be helpful. And I'll start by saying that even within your own traffic study, the idea of restriping is really what I would consider a medium-term solution while you're trying to come up with a longer-term solution to deal with parking. In Mountain View as well as here, the policy is that while you're waiting for a more comprehensive solution, that might be a parking garage, that you have a short-term solution to increase your existing parking supply. So for us, we did not worry about having to put in new utilities. We didn't worry about having to repave. We tried to be as economical as possible, and believe it or not, within downtown Mountain View, we created 110 new parking spaces for $560,000. How did we do that? We didn't make them dig up the parking lots. We didn't make them put in new utilities. We didn't make them put in new locations of various things and landscape elements. We went through and just came up with a new plan, and then we slurry coated all the parking lots just like you would in a maintenance program and restripe them, because the goal was to create as much short-term parking as possible, which bought us time to do a comprehensive plan for the next step downtown, which in your case may be a new parking garage. So having a policy in place, to me, makes sense to say that this is a medium-term solution in a comprehensive three-step program. The city has already taken the first step by doing the parking study and by implementing better enforcement, better information to business owners and so forth. And normally you would consider this a medium-term solution, the long-term solution being potentially a parking garage. So if you do it in context with that, you can simplify how difficult it is, and by also counting it only as a maintenance program, then you won't be forced into meeting all these new guidelines regarding stormwater runoff and other guidelines that have come into play and mandated by the state since 2013. So I would simplify rather than the other way around and do the most for the least amount of money while you have time to come up with a master plan for all of downtown.
Thank you.
Kim Cranston.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Kim Cranston, 27080 West Fremont Road, Los Altos Hills, president of Los Altos Property Owners Downtown. We sent in some comments earlier today. I didn't know if you got them all, so it was a little late in the afternoon. Presented copies there. Generally, we approach or approve and support the proposal, but have some reservations. One is about the width of the stalls. The other morning, I had some free time before a meeting. I ran around with the tape measure, and I found stalls in downtown Los Altos ranging from 7 to 7.5 to 8 to 8.5 to 9 to 9.5 feet in width. And have some real concerns if you were to reconfigure stalls to make them all 9, you'd lose a lot of the white dot stalls, which are on the outer edges of particularly Plaza 7 and 8. We found, too, that the standard of 9 doesn't seem to exist anywhere on the peninsula except perhaps Los Altos, and there, obviously, there's some variance here in terms of the actual width of stalls in the city. A number of cities, as you'll see there, Belmont, Los Gatos, Menlo Park, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Redwood City, San Carlos, Burlingame, Sunnyvale, Walnut Creek, all have 8.5-foot widths or less. We couldn't find any city with 9 feet. And I actually also had some free time when I was coming back from the dentist the other day and stopped at Stanford Shopping Center and Safeway Menlo Park and found they were both 8.5. And I've been informed recently that actually places like Safeway that use 9 usually do it to allow space between cars for shopping carts to move, which isn't a problem here in Los Altos. So I hope you'll think about having a variation that preserves the white dot stalls, maybe moves to something that's more uniform with the rest of the peninsula, 8.5, and maybe have something new, which I understand some other communities are moving to, which is family stalls of 10 feet for large SUVs. We also had concern about the notion that there had to be proximity between a property for which plaza might be reconfigured. Historically, the plazas were created for the whole downtown, and so it wasn't like a property in Plaza 2. It was just reserved those parking stalls in Plaza 2. And we're concerned about balkanizing here. If you say that somebody just redevelops parking in Plaza 8, it has to be somehow relational to the building in that plaza. We think rather they should be open and thought of as available and continue this historical precedent of it's for the whole plaza, the whole parking district, and not say that it's somehow attached. We don't own these individually. It's almost like a tenant in common relationship. I see I'm almost out of time there, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Wing.
I'm Jim Wing. I live on Milverton Road. This is a bare bones set of guidelines, and I strongly urge that you put enough specifics in it to make it truly effective so that everybody, the public, the city staff, and the developers know what is ahead of them if they go into this. I am concerned about the when you put a priority of parking, maximize parking, onto one of our plazas, that the trade-off is congestion. The San Antonio Streetscape program, that had a priority to maximize parking. And what happened? We now have congestion in Plaza 1. So I think that is an important design parameter that you really have to consider, is that the narrower you get, inevitably you end up with congestion. Because keep in mind, perpendicular head-on parking, it takes twice as long time-wise to either enter or exit as does the diagonal. So there's a great competitive advantage that we have for our diagonal, and also we have quick turnaround parking, which the diagonal works for all of us. Now, I also am concerned about the undergrounding of the utilities, or the utilities. Our code really isn't written to cover any of the subjects on the plaza. It's just a short paragraph, and it's mostly for residential, works just fine. But keep in mind that the backbone, our plazas are the backbone of the electrical power distribution in our downtown. Basically, if you change one or two poles, you actually disrupt the system, so it can spread out. Concerned, too, about adjacent property owners who, if things go underground, they're going to have to change their power control boxes, and many of these things are not per code, and that means that change is very expensive. And the procedure needs to point out things like that, and the developer is responsible for what he does to his neighbors also. For these procedures to help protect we, the residents, and protect the city, and to keep what we want, you do have to go into the details. The devil is always in the details. You just as well put it up front, and everybody knows what they're getting into. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, the California Vehicle Code recommends 9 by 18, and I'm pretty sure that's where Los Altos got their basic guideline. Thank you.
Jim, I have a question for you. In the letter you sent dated May 9th, under F, you talk about guidelines for solar power as option for trees is required. And I wasn't clear what you meant by that.
Oh, it's an either or anyway. You know, there are some plazas to where the trees really are needed because they're a drive-by plaza anyway. Some of the inners, and we have some old pistache trees that we saw this spring. They're struggling. So therefore, there may be some consideration there, and that is maybe a public benefit that we should think about. Things like maybe the center plazas, like maybe Plaza 2 or something like that, which looks buildings both ways, and you don't quite you get the outer ones need to be trees.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ted Sorensen.
Ted Sorensen, 40 Main Street. A couple of comments. First of all, I agree with the comments of Mr. Maston and Cranston. When it comes to, we are considering a proposal with respect to Plaza 10. So we have thought about this a little bit more than maybe some people have. And the backup lane at 24 feet is my understanding that's a pretty standard in most jurisdictions. And if and most of these plazas are 150 feet. If you have a backup lane of 26 feet instead of 24 feet, then you wouldn't be able to do a reasonable layout. The layouts that AECOM has done were based, I think, on this 26-foot standard. As a result, they're very inefficient. You can actually get as many as 300 new stalls throughout the downtown. That's a 20% increase if you have the 24-foot backup lane and 8.5 feet. And those are the standards that are available in Palo Alto, Mountain View, Menlo Park, Sunnyvale, pretty much everywhere except here. So I think that in reality, if you're going to have a program at all, it will have to be with those dimensions, because otherwise no one will do it, I suspect. So then the practical aspect of how you bring one of these projects forward should be considered, because Zach mentioned that maybe the parking lot would come through first. Well, one of the things that has been talked about is, well, what does a development plan look like? And if you have to do an undergrounding of the utilities and a detailed plan, that's a very expensive proposition, where it's just really not necessary. You can underground utilities. Undergrounding utilities just cost money, and you can solve those problems by doing that. But you really have to have a plan that you know is going to be accepted by the commission and the council before you can bring anything forward. So we need a planning level, and we should be able to bring it forward with a project together, because that's what makes sense. And there's no concern, there should be no concern on your part of anyone land banking stalls. That's simply every developer who builds extra stalls will wake up every morning and pray that some developer will come forward and pay him back for the stalls that he already built. Trust me, that will not be a concern. Thank you.
That's it? Close it?
Okay, let's open it up for discussion. Why don't you start, Mike?
Sure. So what I heard during public comment and some of these thoughts, was, do we look at resurfacing a plaza lot versus rebuilding it? Is it adjacent building versus a district-wide? It should be combined with a project versus separate efforts. I know in the letter from James Wing, the loading zone was also an issue. Should we consider that? And then the dimensions of the spaces and shade versus existing trees. And I think those are all valid things. I don't know, in thinking about all those different elements, right? So for me, I think there is that, let me just start with resurfacing versus rebuilding. I think that's a really good point that was made about resurfacing. It's a way to really look at just trying to get the maximum amount of spaces versus trying to have to rebuild the entire lot. Because if we then put a parking structure there, they restripe it, and then they build something, well, you've kind of paid for half of what you're going to do for when you rebuild it. As far as undergrounding utilities and things like that. Also, I think that the project should be part of, the restriping project should be part of a project that's going to be built. I feel like that makes sense. To say you're going to restripe the thing and then we're going to do this building and then we look at the building and say we're not even in agreement of that, well, now you've got kind of one thing going before the other. I think they need to be combined and tied together. Adjacent versus the district, I'm kind of, I don't know, I can see the benefit of having it being next to a parking area, district. You've got a building and you got the spaces that are nearby because that's where your customer is going to come from. But yet, it's the district. People stop in one place and they go walk to another place. And how can you limit just one area? I know the city council was very adamant about trying to make it adjacent to the same structure, the plaza. But if you're in Plaza 9 and you back up to it, you can't restripe anything. You can't rebuild anything because part of it's owned by somebody else. So, but that gets to the question of, well, then if can you cherry pick a plaza, right? There's a plaza that you can get a lot of space out of. Is that a good thing or bad thing? Because I can do the project right away. So my thought is to be more towards the district. I think that the district kind of makes sense, that we look at the whole picture if we're going to create a policy to deal with that. I also believe that the policy should include something about the loading zone so that there should be enough width in the area next to a store so that there can be trucks that come back and forth. I don't see that in the current proposal. That there needs to be some way to say that you can't create the striping such that there's 20 feet, but now cars can't get by because the truck that's there delivering can't get through, if you know what I mean. And then the dimensions, I've heard 8.5, I've heard 9, I don't know where we come up with a standard. I'd like to see something that's more concrete than just a number, and saying that's our standard, but based on something. Based on a car size, based on, we want to go a certain percentage above and beyond the car width. I don't know what a standard car width is these days. I'm sure that the plazas, when they were built, were probably done in the 50s when we had big clunkers and metal buildings, but nowadays we have very small cars. So maybe the first, there has to be maybe it's a mix. Maybe there's certain cars certain aisles are 9 feet and certain aisles are 8 feet because the car widths are different. That to me makes sense rather than just saying carte blanche, it's got to be 9. And then the existing trees versus shade, I think that that's a valid point about looking at trying to preserve trees. But if I get back to resurfacing things, then I'm really not concerned about the trees themselves because I'm going to leave everything there. I'm just going to seal it and resurface it. But I do have comments about 6 and 7 that are listed here, and that is that the plaza reconfiguration needs to be reviewed by a civil engineer, peer-reviewed. I don't understand why that's there. I mean, it seems like somebody should come through, and it should be by the city staff that says, okay, this is the redesign, but I don't know why somebody else needs to look at that. I mean, that seems to be an added cost. And the plaza improvement plans needs to be prepared by a civil engineer or licensed architect, but the part that I don't understand is why would landscaping and irrigation, I mean, I'm not an expert, maybe you guys can answer that, but to me, landscaping and irrigation doesn't need to have a civil engineer to design that. If that's what we're going to do is rebuild it. I think that we should look at those elements. And the other thing that I had a comment about, I don't know, is that the parking stall allocation, which is the first item, I think it's the restriping project will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Because I don't think that the allocation of the newly created spot should be on first-come, first. It's the restriping of this plaza because the rest of it is, because it's tied to a project. It's like we're going to do this project, we're going to restripe this area, and whoever decides which plaza they're going to restripe first and gets their bid in or for that project, that should happen first. It shouldn't be that we restripe this area and I said I got this project and I need spaces. You know what I mean? That it seems like it doesn't make sense to me to say that the allocation of this parking spaces should be on a first-come, first-served basis, but yet the restriping should be. Because after that, once you restripe it, you create additional spaces, then items 2 and 3 are about, well, who gets those extra spaces? And that's kind of my general comments. I mean, it's a tough subject, and I don't feel like I have enough information to really say, let's go forward this way or that way. That's it. On to you, sir.
So I thought the basic idea was, it's a good idea. I think it's clever. What I didn't quite understand and became more and more apparent with the public comments was what the intent of the council was. For example, to take the parking, the whole parking area versus having the spots nearby whatever project it is. Los Altos is so tiny that does it really matter if the spots are exactly at the location of the project? I mean, that seems silly. I try to park as close as I can oftentimes, but my wife, for example, insists on parking as far away as she can so she can walk. So I just don't I don't understand the concept of why the spots have to be. And so what if there's one of the parking plazas is cherry-picked and it's redeveloped? What's our goal? Is our goal to completely underground all of our utilities, replant the trees, repave the parking lots, and, oh, by the way, get a few additional parking spots? Or is our goal, like Bill Maston said, is our goal to get more parking places, which is what Mountain View did? And so I just don't understand what they're doing with this policy. I mean, it's like the parking spots, we're only going to get an additional 3 parking spots, but they have to be right near whatever business is paying for them. And, oh, by the way, we're going to underground all the utilities, dig the parking area up, and completely repave it. And it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't understand what the goal is. So I think, and one other comment with regards to Jim Wing, I think he makes some very good points, and I think more specificity is better than less. But because we don't know what the council has in mind, I just don't understand what their goal is. It's hard to put in the specificity. And I think pardon me, the public commentary, I think, has brought up some interesting points. The point about what do you do when the city wants to change its mind about something and a private party has paid for the redevelopment of a parking lot, and the city wants to rip it up and do something else 5 years from now or whatever, that needs to be in this policy, that the city has a right to do it, or the city is going to be forced to negotiate with the person that, the individual that had the parking lot improved. That kind of stuff needs to be included. So there's, I just think there's a bunch of stuff that's lacking from this, including the fundamental, what's the goal of this project? I mean, obviously the goal is to get more parking spots, but it just doesn't seem like it was very well thought through. So I'll probably lose my job over this, but whatever. And I think my colleague Terry here made a lot of valid points as well. Sir.
So I don't think the goal is to get more parking spots. The goal is to offer an alternative to properties in Los Altos which are parking locked, okay, that there is not availability of parking. And it's kind of a bad solution because there is no good solution. And I agree there's some interesting questions about how you allocate. What do you do if you let a developer redevelop and then the city wants to put a parking garage over it? But I think it's important to get some clarity here. What we're talking about is allowing second-story development, which by and large will be office, okay, or residential. And so the issue of adjacency actually is really important. If what we were putting in was retail on the second floor, then yeah, you park in one plaza, you park in another plaza. But what we're talking about are long-term parkers. And we already know from experience that long-term parkers don't park where they should. They don't park in plazas 1, which has got all that extra room. They want to park right next to where they are. They don't want to get parking permits. We've been through this as a community for a long time. So when you say adjacency doesn't matter, I think you are thinking broadly, and you're thinking about retail. But the problem or the solution that we're trying to offer is to offer a solution to develop to property owners where they want to put in something above. I mean, that's really the only reason that it comes about, because if they develop to their full FAR, they don't have to add parking. It's only when they add a second story or a third story, if they're allowed to add a second or third story. So I would encourage my fellow commissioners to think long and hard about the adjacency question, because I think it becomes more important. The issue of Mountain View as an example, I have a tough time using Mountain View as an example for anything with regard to Los Altos. And I think the notion of, let's just quickly resurface, you get what you pay for, And while I can't tell you I fully understand the council's approach to all the things that they're putting in there, I do understand the notion that if you're going to do it right. If you're going to do it, somebody has to hire the civil engineer to figure out if you've got drainage. Because if I understand city staff correctly, there isn't a civil engineer on staff who's going to do that. So, some of the requirements I think make sense. The question of dimension of parking lots, of parking spots, I'm one of those guys who has, when we drive my wife's minivan and I go through all the parking spots and in a parking garage, and it says compact and compact and compact, and there are no full-size spots, guess what? I park in a compact spot at some point. So, it's nice to talk about different size spots and people are getting smaller cars, but on any given day, the SUVs and minivans in Los Altos, they take up more room. the notion of combining this with a project makes perfect sense. The thing that Jim Wing points out in his very thorough analysis, and Jim, thank you, is that this is actually a lot more complicated than we think. And as a result, it leaves me saying, why would we do this? Why would any developer want to do it? I mean, it's nice to give them the option, but the amount of staff time to get this so people aren't gaming the system, so that we know we get what we really want, so that we've got clarity, frankly, I'd rather see staff time spent doing other things. So I'm having a tough time with the proposal. I'm not against the concept of giving property owners who don't have an option of building underground an option. It's just not clear to me that this is a good option, and loosening our standards and eliminating the adjacency and doing all those things, I understand it helps them, but I don't think it helps the Los Altos community at large. And the goal really is not to get more parking. Look at what we're doing. We're getting 0 to 9 spots, and we're causing disruption of a parking lot for a year, 9 months. That's a pretty lousy trade-off as a community. So, do we need more parking? Yes. Do we need a parking garage? Absolutely. So why don't we come up with a solution to fix the real problem? So I'm having a tough time recommending approval of this to council, is where I come out.
Wonka.
So I think the public can see we are a little bit torn up here. I agree with a few points, but I think that's why the beauty is we are 5 of us and we have some differences and different experiences. A couple of things. I think I agree that when I was reading the report, I was trying to figure out what's the message in here. I mean, what are we really focusing on? What are we supposed to do tonight? Really, what's the outcome? And I thought, okay, the main thing is, yes, we need parking. Yes, the parking garage is somewhere in the future. Nothing that we can see as yet, but it's being worked at. But meanwhile, it looks like something has to happen, right? Some of the projects which has come up in front of us, they would have benefited if they chose to, if this thing existed for them to, in my eyes. It's their choice. At least they would have a choice. Right now, there is no choice. And we are expecting the entire commercial district to kind of wait till things happen the way they are going to happen, because it's not going to be easy. So I personally think there should be something in the interim that public can use. It's a choice, and it's their choice. If they want to pay for it and do it, it's up to them. So that's one thing. Discussion on the width of the parking stalls and the depth of the parking stalls, I think it's going to be a very personal choice up here, because none of us are traffic engineers. I agree that most of us drive big cars, and parking in Safeway is like in Mountain View. I'm a great driver, so I'm good at it, and I park in a compact, and I got a ticket in Palo Alto for parking in a compact. I thought they should give me an award for parking in a compact. But so discussion of
well, they did notice you, and
I know
you were recognized.
They should have said, "Oh, look, she parked." But my thing is that discussion, I'm not comfortable making that discussion. And I think we have in here that if and when somebody decides to use the plaza, they will be submitting proper studies and drawings for it. I think at that point, we can make a decision, and they can, if they feel otherwise, they can propose that, okay, you know what, if we did it this way, it's this many cars, and this is our backup area. But I'm not comfortable making a decision that, yeah, let's, reduce the parking stalls to 8.5 feet and then reduce it to 24, and none of us are experts in that. But we do have to give our suggestions to make sure that expertise comes in front of us so we can make an informative decision. I forgot who mentioned, but one thing was mentioned that the staff, why can't the staff look at the drawings? Why do they have to go? Just like us, I don't think all the staff has, the capability or the knowledge to do that, and that's a huge liability. We'll rather get somebody who is licensed to do the study, so we even can make a very educated decision up here. I think we need that kind of information. I personally believe, and I'm a believer of not doing things halfway. When, and maybe should not use the word if, but when the parking garage happens, I think the entire downtown would be very happy, and they'll be there digging with the rest of the council to make it happen, even if they've put money in it. But I think if we are doing something, we should do it right. And just putting a coating and restriping it, in my eyes, does not look at the overall picture. And I think just putting it in there to underground stuff, as a homeowner, I hated it when I had to underground it, and David knows. I was like, we have to spend so much money. Why are they making us do this? But I realized if we had not done it then, it would have never happened. And because we were doing it at that time, you kind of start looking at what's happening to the sidewalk. Where are the trees? So it's like an overall impact. So I think it's important to look at everything rather than, if it's costing $100 and we're going to spend only $70, but in my eyes, that 70 is lost. We could have just done it the right way in the first place. So I think that's important.
But Malka, that's not the trade-off. He said they got 110 parking spaces additional, and it cost $500,000.
Who said?
Bill Maston said that in Mountain View. And, the parking plazas are not in terribly good condition. They're asphalt. So resurfacing them would actually be an improvement.
It definitely is, but if you have an option...
changing the angle or the size or the number of parking spaces, this is not a schlocky, that's not like making a crummy building with poor materials. It actually, in some ways, it would be an improvement, even without digging up all the parking, all the asphalt, undergrounding all the utilities, which may have to be dug up and reconfigured anyway if a parking garage goes in. So,
and when it happens, right? So if you're waiting for 10 years or 5 years for something to happen, it's just like you're doing a termite treatment on a house and you say, okay, let's just fix this hole, because once we build the new house, we can just tear the whole house down. By that time, the termite has really spread the whole thing. So that's just what I think. If you're doing something, we should just look at it at least holistically, so we don't miss something.
But we're not talking about the difference between $70 and $100. It's like,
and that gives the opportunity,
more expensive.
And that gives the opportunity for the city to actually put some of their utilities underground and update them.
Yeah. But Ken, Mountain View, you look at the configuration of their parking plazas, and they are large and rectangular. They don't have,
John, I go to Mountain View all the time, and I don't have the same attitude about Mountain View that you do. And I don't have any. And I park in their parking plazas and their parking garages, and I find both the width of the aisles and the width of the parking spaces to be adequate. They're fine.
Yeah, and I'm not comparing one city to the other. I'm just focusing on the problem and the situation we have at hand. But personally, I think when you're doing something, you should look at it from every angle, because if you just come in and just do and not see everything, you're going to definitely miss something.
And that's what we're doing. But I think we need more. We need a more specific statement from the council as to what their goal is. And I don't happen to agree with John's conclusion that this is not really about making more parking spaces. And by the way, if we're just talking about putting on a second story so that there can be office, businesses and offices rather than retail, it still doesn't matter whether or not we do one parking plaza or another, because no matter where you park, you can walk a little way to your business. Right now, you can't even park. So whatever we do, number one, is probably going to be a relatively short term in the, probably the 5 to 7 year range. And number two is the downtown is small enough that even if you have to park at the other end of town, it'll still make life better for people than
Then
it is now.
I would like to hear from staff what the council's thing is, because we all
With
took
the
it. I would like to ask staff what the council's feedback was on this, and the reason is we all have different take on it.
Did we get feedback from the
Yeah.
council?
For example, your thought of having it next to the project, I took it, well, how does the staff or the city decides what's fair? Like with somebody building a project here decides, well, you know what, that's the cheapest plaza to restripe and redo. I'm actually going to do that first. Now, how do you make it fair?
But so what? So that it's the benefit. John said, well, there's no benefit except the developer. Again, I disagree. The benefit is to the community.
Yeah.
When there are more parking spots added, it benefits the community. And if we spend an enormous amount of money and get 3 additional spots and they happen to be adjacent to some project, that's just silly. I mean, nobody's going to do it.
I'm not arguing that, but the only thing I'm saying is, how do you be fair? And if you are running your business,
What is
even
the
though you're doing the project,
Yes.
but now you're digging up another plaza where you're doing construction here, where you could be easily doing your plaza while your construction is happening, even though you've gone right across town and now you're constructing there. Now 2 things are
point.
disruptive. So I'm just saying, I don't know what the thought process, but I'm sure they've thought of it certain ways. It'll be good to hear from staff. I just read this, but I don't know what the background was. But
So I'm going to pop in on that
Sure.
particular subject, and then I think we should ask Zach in particular. But in my mind, it's clear that the intention of this policy is to increase parking, and this was a solution that was born out of the downtown parking management plan. I think what's unfortunate is it was the worst solution presented.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, if
and-
that's the solution, not very effective.
And it's a Herculean effort. So it's almost
Expensive.
like it's a very expensive. It's not the most efficient way to do it. And I think at one of our last meetings, one of the commissioners said it's like reshuffling the deck on the Titanic. And
Right.
yet that's
Good
the
balance
one
there.
solution that came out of this management plan. So we can ask Zach, but it seems clear to me the intention, though it may seem befuddled, is to increase parking, to allow developers, I mean, it says it right here,
and give
to
them an
achieve
option.
additional parking, to allow developers to meet the required parking demand.
So it's basically giving
So-
them an option.
So why don't, on that specific issue, and then I'll say my other comments.
I definitely don't want to put words in the mouths of council in terms of what the specific intent was. I'll offer my takeaway from what the apparent intent was with their direction, which was it really is twofold. They're seeking for ways to get an increase in public parking in the near term. It's not necessarily an interim solution because it would be rather permanent, and you are getting a new project out of it. So with, say, 6 new public parking spaces, you are also getting an increase in square footage of whether it's office, most likely office. As John mentioned, it would really allow for a second story because every property in the downtown district has the ability to build up to 100% FAR without providing any on-site parking. So really, it does allow for a second story. At this point, with the 30-foot height limit on Main and State, third stories really are not feasible. The hotel did have that, but that's a unique circumstance, and I wouldn't imagine any other building downtown that's non-hotel would be able to squeeze it, except for maybe residential. But keep in mind that with that new development, that'll be coming along with the public parking. So you are also increasing, along a one-for-one basis, the parking demand downtown. So you are getting new public spaces 24/7, but you also are increasing the demand. So it's kind of a joint policy where you are gaining some additional public parking, but it is a policy that would provide an option for downtown property owners if they wish to redevelop their properties. So I think those two probably are running parallel with motivating this policy.
So to build on that, in my mind, the Planning Commission has to help push forward a solution. And even if it's this inelegant, inefficient solution, we have to provide something to developers who are constantly coming before us and are either underparked because of the constraints of their lot, to have some solution. And a better solution, I think we have all said this, would be a parking and loop program that works towards a garage. And I don't believe it's more complicated than we think. I think it's simpler. And I think that because every other town that neighbors us has come up with this same solution. So we're not reinventing the wheel. But yet we're not
Seeing
doing
that in
it.
front of us.
Right? We don't have that in front of us. We should, but we don't. So I want to somehow find a way to make this work, but I don't think what we have in front of us is something I would recommend, and I'll go through sort of each of the topics. I like how you divided it up, Mike. Resurfacing versus rebuilding. I concur with a couple of the commissioners that if we're doing this, we're rebuilding it, because this short-term solution is likely to be the only long-term solution. Right now, it's the only solution, so I'm going to presume it's the long-term solution. And you do get what you pay for, and you have one shot. If someone's going to come in 5 years and rebuild it, then all the money spent resurfacing is going to have been for naught. And I can understand why someone would want to. If you can get over 100 spots for $500,000, that's $5,000 a spot. It's a no-brainer. But any parking and loop program we eventually have is going to be much more expensive than that. So there shouldn't be any deals at the city's expense. The benefit of just resurfacing is kind of nominal to the city. The benefit of rebuilding and putting underground utilities is significant. So at least we should have that. In terms of whether it should be close to the project, I don't think it needs to be. We are a very small town. And we need to come up with a solution that's fair for everyone in the parking district. And I think that is the only way to do that. There's going to be more consistency and uniform treatment of developers if they are allowed to not just look at the ones next to them. I would like, though, as part of this policy, for the city to have in place sort of standards about how they want this to be done, so that we don't have 10 architects, 10 landscapers, 10 structural engineers, each coming up with a different solution. At one point, when we were just the Planning Commission, we were talking about signage in town, and they were talking about signage in parking lots, and we should move that forward. That should be part of this. This is going to be the signage, this is expectation, how you display the hours. All of that should be done and part of this, so that it's not, well, we did the first one and maybe we should do it differently for the second one, and this third person had a better suggestion.
It's like
City should come up with that, and it should be articulated and understood right at the offset. Dimensions, I think just putting this number down, we need to have a compelling argument for why we're putting this. And I agree that there are standards that should be uniform and consistent with neighboring cities. It shouldn't be more difficult to do a parking, to put in parking in Los Altos than in other towns. And if it is, there should be a reason for that. And I don't understand it at this point. It's not articulated why our standard is so different than any other. And I like the idea of compact and family, and I think that's the future of parking, and that should be considered. And if we think about this restriping program, in all likelihood, even if we do build a garage, these are going to be restriped and the parking solution for a long time. So they should kind of embrace the current or future standards for parking and not just rely on what has been in the past. And maybe put in for electrical cars and really think this through.
Who would own an electric car?
So I want to see this move forward. I think it's our responsibility to, if tasked with the job of finding a solution, even if we don't think this is a good solution, of moving it forward. So I think maybe the way to do is identify the areas that we think there need to be greater specificity and uniformity, and perhaps give that feedback back to staff to then work on it some more so that we can find something that we can then
Should we ask
approve of.
first,
So I have a
what's
question.
the process?
Though, if we, you're talking about different widths of parking spots, but, if you go to a 8.5 foot or even a 9 foot head-on in parking, the challenge of getting in and out of some of the parking spots of the plazas is significant because of the backup room. So, how do you work that in? So we're going to have a variable, the width of the parking changes depending on the parking plaza, depending on
The angle, everything.
backup room.
That actually could be done. I mean, if you had someone, a civil engineer or an architect who was experienced with that, they could have some variability in the standards as a function of which parking plaza you're talking about.
Right.
That might not actually
But
be a
it
bad
seems,
idea.
it seems to me.
Then you run it, and
That's
and
the
I-
specificity thing we're talking
Well,
about.
but, I mean, let's take the example of Safeway in Mountain View.
Okay, which lot, the lower lot or the upper lot?
The lower lot. I mean, I don't park there because it's too hard to get in and out of the parking spots, all right? So somebody approved that. It doesn't mean it works,
But
but somebody approved it.
let me make an observation. That parking lot is frequently quite full. So there are some large group of cars, maybe they don't live in Los Altos, that can park in that lot. I do know that you have a larger car, and it may be more difficult to maneuver that car. But those parking lots are heavily used, and I shop in that Safeway, so I go there frequently. And I frequently don't park in the downstairs parking lot because the upstairs one is more available. So whatever trouble people are having, they're managing to do it. I haven't seen, cars backing into each other. I haven't seen cars too close together where you can't get out and open the door.
Well-
Whatever the specs are in that lower parking lot, it seems to work.
So-
And maybe not for your car, but it does
Well,
work.
and in that case, as David said, it's 9 foot.
Let's Zach, what did you want to add?
I just wanted to provide a little context for the discussion about parking stall and parking drive aisle widths. The city previously did have a compact standard, and then we also had a standard. The standard stall was 10 by 20, and the compact standard, I believe, was it 8 or 8.5? 8.5 by 16. And we also did provide our standard backup area for a perpendicular stall was 26 feet. And if you were willing to widen your stall to 10 feet, you could bring that down to 24 feet. The logic being the narrower the drive aisle width, the wider the stall, so you can make it in easier. And those standards were simplified to the standard. We started a 26-foot backup area and a 9 by 18 universal stall to simplify it, make it easier, rather than having this overall evaluation, trying to determine the best mix. Also, there is a quality of use for public parking. When you have a narrower stall, you're more likely to ding the car next to you when getting out, or your car suffers a ding from the adjacent car. And that was definitely a motivation in looking, well, what's that ideal width for a parking stall? And these are public spaces. And when we look at private developments, and actually, I mean, there have been multiple projects that have come by through the Planning Commission over the past several years. And in each one, we have looked at not necessarily the parking stall width. That has always been expected to be 9 by 18, but we have looked at drive aisle widths. Safeway has a 25-foot width. They provided justification from the traffic engineer. The 396 First Street residential project, they have 24 and 25-foot wide drive aisle widths. They also provided an analysis from their traffic engineer, and really in that case, staff was concerned, but given that it's a residential parking garage and it's more controlled, less vehicular traffic, the justification was found to be acceptable for a narrower drive aisle width. Safeway, based on their dimensions, the 25 worked to get the double-loaded perpendicular spaces, and in evaluating it, there was a determination that it would still be functional for a higher capacity. So there's definitely been evaluation. These standards aren't arbitrary. They've been looked at quite a bit, and well, it is subjective and up to each jurisdiction to establish whether you have a universal stall, whether you have a range of stalls. Based on the policy that's been established in Los Altos, based on the factors I just outlined, that was how we arrived at the 9 by 18 stall. And then when council reevaluated or looked at this particular policy, they did specifically provide direction that they wanted to maintain that 9-foot width. So that gets us to where we are right now and provides some background as to why we have the dimensions that we do.
And I want to know, I mean, we're talking about discussing what's in front of us, but I want to hear from staff, what can we do right now when we're sitting here? I mean, can we make these changes and they're going to go back and work on it, and does it come to us, or are we just giving some guidance that's going off to council? Or
Well, for me, I think there are two separate things going on here that we've kind of gotten into one document, which is, one is the parking requirements, whether it's a parking garage or whether we're restriping a thing. It's like these are the dimensions that this public area should have in height, width, back, all that, right? Underground utilities, the whole bit. And then there's okay, if you do this, if you're going to do a project that's going to create extra spaces, then those spaces, it's an loop program. How do we, it's about the project itself, about what it causes and what happens and who gets.
Part of it's the technical specs, and part of it's the politics and the philosophy.
Right, of what happens to those extra spots and how does it work and all that. Because if somebody comes in and says, I want to build a parking garage, I'm going to put $30 million in here because I want to redo this whole block, it should match the policy of how we're going to build anything. And whether it's restriped or not restriped, you know what I mean? It's like that's just one solution. That's just an answer to solving, getting more spaces. That's easier. But I think that there's another component, which is what's the height and what's the width and what's, is there a percentage? We have this many spots in this area that they're going to rebuild. Should have this much electrical.
I thought the recommendation was just strictly reconfiguration of public parking.
Right, I know that's.
So when I read what we're tasked with discussing today, it is to consider a policy that would allow the reconfiguration.
Yeah.
Now, is our instruction, Zach, to give you feedback on this or to approve this? What are you looking for?
Yeah, that's what.
Well, if you look at the background, there's 9 directives that council provided. So my understanding and my recommendation would be is that you base your recommendations off of those 9 parameters and maybe build off of them. And so if you're not agreeing with those, then maybe the best direction is to recommend not adopting this policy. But since council has already weighed in on this, I think that's kind of your baseline that you're starting from is these 9 directives that were incorporated into this policy and then in some cases refined and elaborated upon. But I think that's really the task before you. Based on those 9 parameters, do you recommend approval or not of a policy that would allow for consideration of private proposals to restripe? So this policy is relatively narrow focused on restriping of public plazas by private developers. If it was, and we looked at this in the parking management plan, if there was a larger number of spaces to be attained, the practical thing is for the city to take on this project since they are city plazas, and then they are benefiting the downtown as a whole. In this case, these spaces would be added to our public parking, but they would be benefiting a specific project. So there's a certain intent in mind here. So within those parameters, I think the commission should consider this policy, either recommend approval or not approval, but start there. I would say if there's disagreement on those fundamentals, then that probably means you would be providing a negative recommendation.
So we can't just pick and choose.
So what I would suggest is we go through these 9, and some are more controversial than others, and for the ones that we have difficulty with, we should give our comments about what the issue we have with that particular.
But that was my
Standard is.
question, that can we pick and choose from those 9, or all 9 have to be approved or not?
Well, that's ultimately the commission's prerogative, but I would say, obviously, the council's the final word here.
Of course.
So it seems like they provided some basic direction here. So if you're disagreeing, then it seems like you're going in the direction of recommending not approval of this policy.
Can we split these? I mean, I look at 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and 9.
Like vote them in a
that's what
bunch?
Right, is
I'd
like
to go
one
through
area
this.
about of that, but 4, 5, and 8 are like how to go.
But that's my question. I mean, even if we go and discuss it in that, are we okay
Well,
doing that?
I see our role as providing council the PTC's feedback on
So it is a
on
feedback, it's
issue-
not
on
denial or
where
approval.
we think there needs to be greater specificity or uniformity or whatever it is our comment is.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Is it that, or are we have to make a decision, yes or no?
Well, there's two. First off, do you recommend adoption of a policy such as this or not? That should be the basis of the motion.
But wait, I mean,
I mean, because we've got a policy, there's a policy in front of you. So does the commission recommend adoption of a policy? And then you can obviously make
is
your
this an
recommendation.
adoption of a policy, or is it an adoption
Of
of this
this.
policy?
This policy based on these 9 directives provided by council.
Then I wouldn't support it.
I don't think I think what I've heard is none of us would. So rather
Right.
than just send it back, saying we don't support it, let's
You-
identify
But you
the
and Zach are
issues.
saying opposite things. Zach is saying, your job is to, do you want to recommend this policy?
Yes or
This
no?
policy. And you're saying, oh, I like the policy, but I think we need to go through each thing and then,
No,
No,
edit it.
I'm not saying I like this policy. I'm saying I like
No.
the idea
Right.
of a
That's
policy.
That's what I meant. You
and I
like-
think that we can improve upon this policy.
Right.
They may.
Is
they
that-
may-
They may
Is that what you're
decide to
saying,
take
Zach?
it or leave
I
it.
think they'll appreciate it. I think that's our role.
Well, that's your role. It starts here, and so I think I've given you as much prayer as I can, but ultimately it's your prerogative to move forward as you best see fit, with the goal of providing them with a recommendation.
So we can always.
what I
amend
think is we need to
amendment.
provide what's missing out of this.
Right. We
What
could recommend this if you took these following.
things or change it, or these are the things that we think
Recommendations.
this is where we want to go. Because I mean, I think that there've been some very valid points that
Should
have
we
been
just
brought
start
up.
from one point and go 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
suggest we start at the top
Okay,
and move down.
all right.
You're talking about the policy part?
Developing standards,
Or
the 9, page 1, 9.
So, number.
Number 1.
So wait,
Do you concur
so
on
we,
this?
so we all agree that a policy is a good thing. I mean, I certainly think that.
I
Yeah,
do.
in the
So-
term of
So
what's there.
the
Yeah.
idea of a policy.
It's a good
and
thing.
some of the general concepts of this policy are a good idea. So now we're going to deal with the specifics.
Right.
Okay.
But my question is, back to what I just earlier said.
I want to start with the easier ones.
Well, I'm going to say, but do we need to
Yeah.
develop a policy for parking? The dimensions of a parking stall, how big they are,
Those are the technical.
the technical aspects of it,
Correct.
and then is there a policy for reconfiguring it?
Well,
We just
that's
have
all
one
in there.
policy. We have the
Yeah, it's been done.
reconfiguration policy.
There's direction from council on the table here. I think you have to respect that as the starting point.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. This is the starting point. This
Okay.
is the
We're not
policy.
here redoing the
We're not
city guidelines.
I mean, council has weighed in, and they've
Right.
provided direction as to how they want to see this policy shaped, so that would be my strong encouragement, is to start from that point, or recommend denial of this policy and say you think it should be this way, but this policy is based off of direction provided by council. So if you don't feel that that's the correct way to go, then that should be the intent of your motion and your direction.
Well,
So let me, now I'm confused again. Do you want us to wordsmith this policy or not? So what Ronit is suggesting is that we go down and we wordsmith this policy. And you're saying don't do that?
There's two things in front of you. You've got the draft policy that staff developed based off of the 9 directives provided by council.
Correct.
So those are actions that have already been taken and then handed to the Planning and Transportation Commission.
so what I'm suggesting is that out of the 9, 6 of these are technical specifications, and that a policy could be written out of just those 6. and then the other 3 could be for restriping, which is another separate policy.
Which
And then we,
Yeah, and
Which
you
are
need
the
to focus
technical
on the
ones that
intent of
you're
this
talking-
policy
Which are the
and not get
technical
into
ones?
standards.
So the
that are
technical
outside
ones
of
to me is number 1, stalls must be 9 feet by 18 feet in
We'll
deep.
just say the numbers.
Okay,
We'll go
number 1,
number
number
two.
2, number 3, number 6, number 7, and number 9. If I look at those from the city council, they're all about the configuration of a parking plaza.
Okay, so.
Whether it's built,
Ken, my thought is if we just decide what our position, whether we approve or not this one, this will be a short meeting and we won't have given any meaningful commentary back on why we have issues with it. So my preference is that we go through this and identify the specific issues.
It's
that
more
we would
discussion
like-
between us.
Like more information on or
Clarity,
greater
right.
specificity, and then present that.
Okay.
And we'll see where we end up at the end.
You are the chairperson. Whatever you say.
you lead, we follow.
Okay, so let's start with the technical ones. Parking spaces conforming to 9 feet by 18 feet in depth.
I have a different view from everybody else in this. Again, it's a very technical question. I don't know what the history is, how the city has done their homework in the background. Yes, we've heard different numbers up here, but what you and I go with a tape measure and measure it in Mountain View versus here, we don't have any technical information confirming what the cities have done there and why. So I'm not comfortable. I don't think that is in front of us to ask us to change what the guidelines of parking spaces is. Unfortunate. It's not. If it was, then we would be seeing some studies based on it. And without that knowledge, I'm not comfortable making a decision one way or the other. I think that's what the policy is, and that's what it is. Until some other studies are done to specifically say otherwise. And what I hear from staff is some projects have come in front of the commission, even in front of us, and have justified why they've gone either a smaller width or I would...
Not parking stalls,
aisle widths. But I know we've had a discussion on aisle widths also. So I don't think I'm comfortable making that. We are not here making that decision, right? I just can't make a decision. We don't have any background on how to make it small or big or wide. We have no...
I agree with you.
and each plaza is
That's
gonna be
not within our purview
Yeah.
in this discussion. The city has said, this is what the parking widths are.
And this is the standard,
And,
right?
this is what
That's what the
staff has
city,
said.
I mean, that's what they said in the March 25th
It's like
meeting,
if we get a
right?
project in front of us and they are complying with everything and we say, well, we don't agree with what the city's height limit is.
Right. We think it
how
should
can
be
we say
35
that
feet,
to a
not 30.
applicant?
Right.
So I think we need to be very clear and detached in how we look at these things.
So the city council director said that the stalls must be 9 feet by 18 feet in depth.
as per section 12.74.
I mean, that's just, I'm reading the
Yeah,
report right
so
on
I
the
say-
25th meeting. I don't know how they came to that thing, but I don't think, are you saying that it's
I'm
not
going to
in our?
just, yeah, I'm going to say I'm
That's
sticking
city
with this.
standard.
It's a
That's the
standard.
city standard
So
for
I
parking.
take a different position. I think if this is the standard law of the land, then we wouldn't be altering it in a proposal. If there was a reason to change this, that should come before us.
As a
under-
separate item.
A separate item, and that isn't before us. So this is the standard, and they're
And-
saying, build to the standard.
And I'm saying
Stripe
these
the
should say built to the standard, and then whatever it may be whenever somebody does it. If it changes by then the standard changes.
Okay.
But maybe we can just say as per city standards. In 2 years, 3 years, if the standard changes, then the person builds
So are
according
you-
to that
I think
standard.
that
So-
is,
Are you saying that for item 1, that to eliminate the 9 feet wide by the 18-foot thing, that all parking spaces shall conform to the city's standard parking stall dimension?
Can we say that?
which is,
Period.
or say,
Period.
which is currently 9 feet wide by 18 feet, but may change or be altered.
Right.
Because
Wait, David is saying something.
someone may come to the city and say, if we do here in this parking plaza 8.5 in some and 9 in others, we can get 10 spots instead of 7 spots, and that may be something that the staff wants
Councilors.
or council wants.
Yeah, maybe another way to look at this to to, I think, be constructive, would be to provide some feedback on the policy as drafted, in terms of within that framework, we've taken our best shot at how we can do this, understanding that some of the details have to come later when we have a plan. And that's our approach. And I think if we can make this the best it can be and suggest that to the council, and then as a second approach, if there are some of these elements, some of these 9 elements that you think should be different, not that we have to determine it, but that smaller stalls, for example, should be considered because we could maximize our supply for a short-term gain. Or we shouldn't require utilities to be undergrounded because we're going to tear it up anyway in the future when we do a garage, perhaps, or not. Depends on which plaza it's in. And identify those things so then the council can review this framework that they've put out, whether this policy is going to work ultimately or not, or whether, maybe they reconsider this.
I think that's what Renee was suggesting, and I think that's what we're trying to reword.
Right.
I agree.
Okay,
Coming back to the first one.
So coming back to the first one, what I hear is a suggestion that perhaps rather than fix and set in stone 9 feet by 8 feet for all of time, that it be
at the time of the project.
a little more fluid, right? At
So
the time of the
City
project,
standard parking stall at the time of the project. So
with
whatever
also an
that-
understanding that there may be circumstances for a particular plaza. Let's say you put into compact and one family that allows variation
But I don't
at the
think,
discretion of the staff.
yeah, but I think we can't, I mean, somebody who'll suggest that would come in front of the council or the planning commission anyways with that suggestion. And we'll have that opportunity to look, and the council always have the opportunity to change it.
Not if it specifically states you can only have 8 by 18.
9 by 8.
9 by
18.
18. I mean, that's why I said all all spaces shall conform to the city standard parking stall dimension, period. Because the city should have
They can come
a
up with.
standard parking stall dimension standard, right? That's the policy. And then if it changes
Then-
next year, that's the standard.
Yeah. So
And then
we
we
just
have a
say
conversation
according-
about the standard, not about the reconfiguration of the plaza. It has to be
Okay.
these dimensions.
But, we've all seen lots of commercial projects in town, and if a developer wants to come through and ask for a
Some-
development incentive or a variance, the developers in this town are not shy about asking. So I don't think if we have a policy that we have to worry that
Okay.
somebody
Yeah.
is going to be afraid to come in and say,
Okay.
there's a trade-off
Yeah.
here between, gaining 10 extra spots versus not, because we can take, 1/32 of an inch off
Okay.
and achieve something. If it makes good sense, staff is likely to support it, planning commission's likely to support it, and the council's likely to support it. But you need to put a stake in the ground as to what it is we expect under normal circumstances, and that's why you have a policy.
And city guidelines. I mean, that's the standard right now. So I agree that if we change it to that the city's standard parking stall dimensions at the time of the project, or however you want to phrase it.
Okay, does everyone agree that makes sense? Okay, so we can move on to the next item. Stall orientation, all orientations are allowed. Anyone not,
I have
an
no
objection to that?
None.
Okay, none. All overhead utilities in the subject plaza shall be undergrounded. This kind of goes to the resurfacing versus rebuilding.
I think we have-
Anyone object to that?
None from me.
No.
If I can interject on there, I do want to correct it. It references 1268, which is specific to residential undergrounding. That should have been, it's chapter 132160, which talks about
The commercial.
general removal, relocation of power poles. So that's the more general utilities undergrounding. So that is the correct reference.
Okay, so the reference would change.
Yes,
Okay.
the reference would change.
I'm going to jump to the other technical. 6, the plaza reconfiguration design shall be peer-reviewed by a registered civil engineer and licensed architect hired by the city.
I see that happen all the time, third-party plan check, and
Somebody's gotta
applicants
do it.
pay for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm okay with it. I have no objection.
Okay, I don't either. Anyone have an objection?
My question was, I didn't know what the standard was, so. You guys are the experts more than I am.
Okay, plaza, number 7, plaza improvement plans, including grading, drainage, landscape, and irrigation, shall be prepared by a registered civil engineer and licensed architect. No objection? Anyone?
Nope.
Okay. 9, stormwater
That's just
permit numbers. That's
for-
standard.
And that's a regulation, that's a
Yeah.
law.
There's
Okay.
specific
Exactly right.
thresholds. It's really a non-negotiable.
Okay, so
It's
with,
not discretionary.
the only one comment was number 1 that we had, tying it to the then current code. So moving to number 4, the design shall include a landscape irrigation and tree planting plan. Any
I
objections
think
to that?
that's a technical
Well,
thing also.
I guess the question, the point that was raised by somebody, which I thought was a good one, was for better or worse, the plazas today have some similarity between and among them, and if you have different architects or landscape people, is that a good thing or a bad?
Right.
And I honestly don't know the answer as to whether whether that's going to be, whether it is going to be good or bad.
I was hoping that once we were done all of this, that we will discuss and add a point where we can suggest that if something standard could be created from the city as a guideline to whoever does what, as to the colors or the signage, so there's consistency.
So some level of consistency.
Yeah,
That-
even
that-
landscaping, so you don't have different trees and different plantings and signage everywhere. And
That might
we
fit
can
in
discuss
this.
that, or if you think we can fit it in here.
I mean, we may want to add in, I'm open to either, but we may want to add in this section that, the city should come up with a landscape plan.
But this is just landscaping. I'm saying that we should have a separate line item saying some sort of, and we can discuss with staff, but some sort of a guideline, not just for landscaping, but signage and consistency in.
Right.
But when you have bumpers, like for the stops of the cars, David, is that something that you would expect staff to, or is staff capable of producing that? Or does that require hiring an outside consultant to, just as we did in the downtown, the redesign of State and Main Street? How would that come about?
Well, in terms of a landscape concept, like use pistache trees and oleanders
So we can come up with a
in a
standard.
way that reflects the existing patterns or that kind of thing, or I think we were intentionally kind of leaving it flexible because we weren't sure really how these would be designed.
So I guess my question is it important to have consistency throughout the plazas if there's a new design, and again, it's ranging from sort of how the stops work for the cars and versus how you edge around the planting of the trees versus, I mean, there are a lot of specific details when you actually get into these things. Does the city not care?
Yeah, we do, and I don't think those really, I think those are fine for the policy.
Okay.
And those are the things that we really,
So
as
how,
staff, we-
but there's a question of, again, setting expectations for an applicant, because you don't want to surprise an applicant. That's not fair to do. And so how do you do it in a way that the applicant knows what they're supposed to be doing when they submit plans?
We've been trying to refer to our standards as much as we can. So in terms of, overhang, there's a 2-foot overhang over a curb that's allowed if the landscape can accommodate it. So we locate trees far enough away so that the planters can be wheel stops as well, for example. And that's our city standard.
So there are
But the
standards.
edging around each of, I mean, presumably, if there's a restriping, there may be some relocation of trees, but how you edge around each of the trees and whether you put, other foliage in, oleander or something like that, what's the mechanism to communicate what's expected or what's considered standard, or again, does the city not care?
What we do, and the expectation in the policy is that it is a landscaped parking plaza.
We've been doing our first streetscape improvement plan, the improvements that are done to the corners. We definitely have existing projects that we would look to provide for that, and you have specific situations where you have an edge plaza that might function or be landscaped differently. We also have certain low-impact development runoff requirements where you need treatment areas, and so those need to be planted with certain species that can handle inundation with water, certain types of more pervious soil that can take the runoff. So there's other things that would influence the specifics of the landscaping.
So, but can we, in the policy, can we reference the fact that, the general standard is, what we're seeing in, this city plaza or project, and then the specifics are left between the applicant and staff? Is that?
I mean,
We're saying that in a way. I mean, what council has said and what we built in is pay attention to trying to preserve the mature trees where possible, and then from there it's flexible.
So my only concern with not doing anything more is that the first person the first landscaper is essentially going to be designing our parking plazas. And I would like the city to have a more thoughtful approach to it. What would the city do if they were going to be rebuilding these parking plazas? And let's say no one comes forward. I think people will be coming forward. But let's say no one comes forward in however many years, these parking plazas will need to be redone. What would the city want to see? If our goal is to have more trees in our space, then let's communicate that before the first landscaper comes to us. If there are specific types of drought-tolerant trees we want to see, then let's communicate that as well, so that the first design isn't the one that sets the standard, and it's some,
So you're basically saying there should be kind of a design guideline for parking.
If there were design guidelines for the plaza project, then they already exist. We've already gone through it. But let's, I think, take the time to be more specific. Irrigation, we want drought tolerant.
So it doesn't happen what happened with the beautiful
and that
bus
it has
stop
irrigation because the city's going to be
corner
paying for
which
that
nobody uses.
irrigation. So they should be, a little more proactive in my mind. Right.
So
off
I
the bat.
think not for this point. I would like to add a point at the end, which specifically just doesn't talk about landscaping with signage, color, or what the feel is
Okay,
of the
then
parking.
I'm
That
in
covers
favor of that.
everything. Like there's lighting also we haven't talked about.
Right.
So David and Zach, I mean, can you guys,
Why don't we go through?
designing a project by committee is not always the best thing, but, we're uncomfortable with the lack of specificity only in so much as we don't want an applicant to come in with something and either that becomes a standard and the wrong standard, or an applicant comes in and then gets whipsawed because, no, that's not what we want to see. And so the applicant has spent a lot of time and money designing something that doesn't meet what the city staff believes the standard is. And can you help us on this?
I think we may be talking about something that's not even really necessary, because the point of this policy is to increase parking. You're not going to be increasing landscaping if you increase parking. If we were going to increase landscaping, we'd actually, beyond what we have now, you're losing spaces. So the intent of this policy is probably to provide for a very minimal amount of landscaping, because you're trying to maximize the number of new spaces you can have.
And maintain.
But we're not talking about increasing landscape. We're just saying if there's landscaping that's going to be in the plaza, this is the type of
That's what it looks
landscaping
like.
that we want.
Or the standard we want.
Well, that's the standard.
city's
It's
standard
drought time.
street tree is a pistache. I mean, we have accent trees.
Standards.
That's going to be the most noticeable and visible landscaping. You're going to get very minimal additional landscaping beyond that. I mean, if you look at the plazas now, there's not a ton of landscaping, and
Right.
imagine less than what's there now.
Right, so that's
and
what-
that's what you'd end up with if you're looking to increase
So
parking.
we're saying as a policy, we'd like to maintain the existing city standard landscaping.
But I think that's what it's,
Well, if you do that, you're probably limiting the ability to increase parking. I think the trade-off before you is if you want to maintain the existing landscaping, you can't fit in new parking.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if they're going to put in a new tree, it's this type of tree.
I think the
Right.
confusion is, I think I understand what's happening here. I think what staff is saying is that guideline already exists, right? These are the city trees which you are allowed to plant. They exist. Am I correct?
The pistache
I
is
think that's
the-
what we are getting at. So that already exists. So it won't be part of this. It's something that if somebody comes and says, here's our application, we want to do this, staff is going to say, well, here's the guideline, what you need to focus on. But it's not going to be part of this.
So is there a standard, as an example, is there a standard amount of soil that you want to see around each tree? Is there a city standard for that?
No,
So you don't care? I'm asking, I'm not, I'm just, so
Depend on
if
the
somebody
tree.
wants to come in with a project that has 3 inches of soil around each new tree that gets planted, that's okay?
No,
And
that's
if
why we're going to have
and
professional evaluations.
Well, and
Well,
then if
that's-
another plaza, they want to put in 10 inches of soil, is that okay? I mean, my question is there a standard for what we're going to do? I understand there's a standard, there are a couple of city-approved trees, but in terms of the specific look of a parking plaza when it gets reconfigured, what is that? Is there any guidelines that an applicant needs to know?
Well, yes, and it's preserve the mature trees where feasible. And beyond that, it's flexible.
But I think what we're saying is we've got to have some basic
See,
way
this
that
policy,
so
we're
that
trying to keep this at a higher level
Right.
because we don't know which plaza it's going to be, and there's going to be different issues. We don't know how the circulation's going to work out, but we do know if we're going to landscape, we're going to use Chinese pistache trees. That's our tree in the plaza.
and there has to be a certain dimension around the tree that needs to be preserred because
We'll figure that out and-
You could have asphalt all the way up to the tree
Uh,
potentially in one plaza, and
Not-
another plaza have.
No,
I mean that's
because we would be maintaining the health of the trees, and that's why we would have an architect review the plans or a landscape architect.
Because they'll be giving the standards of how much distance is needed around however big that tree is going to be eventually.
Yeah, and the landscape areas are going to be greater than they are now because to meet our stormwater runoff regulations, we've got to retain and detain soil or water, and so part of that has to be factored into this. I mean, these are details that will be in the actual design of it. You know, I would imagine an applicant, if they wanted to do this, would be approaching staff, getting these bits, so then they could, do their concept,
right.
Accordingly.
and we would move forward. And our goal is trying to keep the policy out of these details intentionally.
But I share the concern of whoever comes around and does the first plaza sets the standard for the rest of the plazas.
So, Mike, I think this solution is that, I don't think we have an objection to number 4, and Malka has suggested adding a provision that suggests that uniformity and consistency and forethought is important.
And that's
And we
something
can-
we are
we can
suggesting,
suggest
and then
that.
it goes
That's
forward.
very
At least it
important.
doesn't touch the 9
what?
points,
Sure.
and that's a
this
separate
would
thing
come
if they...
before the PTC with specifics, at which point you would be able to address all of these and you'd have a plan before you.
Okay, so I think we know where we can,
So we have a 4A.
yeah.
I would
No, I
say
think it
a
goes at
10.
the end, because it's
A
going to
10.
address more than just those 3 issues.
I
So,
would say 10.
5, plaza reconfiguration proposal should consider the transitions between adjacent parking plazas and make all efforts to maintain existing flow patterns.
That's a
That's fine.
no-brainer.
Not
yeah.
controversial. 8, anyone object?
No.
All number 8, all improvements in the subject plaza shall comply with the ADA.
But I think what's missing out of this list of 9 is something about signage. That existing signage, city standard, something.
We have the wayfinding signage that was approved, and
But it should be part of this policy.
Okay, so what would you, this is, I think, where in number 10,
Well, so now we're getting into the wordsmithing part of it.
well, no, I
No,
think
that's
there's a
a concept.
proposal for another,
There's something, in the development standards, there should be something about wayfinding signs should be maintained,
Well,
or something.
Where are you trying to put
The
that?
existing, at the very least, the existing signage needs to be maintained.
Exactly.
There's a different question as to whether, because this is a budget issue with the city, whether I don't know what the city's approved for additional signage, but at the very least, if somebody tears up the plaza, you want to at least make them put back whatever the existing,
signage.
the equivalent of the existing signage.
Exactly.
Right? Right?
Well, how can we define they put the
I would
existing
actually
signage back
suggest we
because
would
they
want
might
more.
be changing? No, but we don't know how the layouts are going to be changing, so we can't expect them to put the existing signage back because it
There's,
might be.
I just know that there needs to be something about
the
signage.
wayfinding, the design concept and the wayfinding project, that has been approved, and I know the city is moving forward with installation of signs consistent with that design scheme, so probably an easy one would just be to say that any
Follow the
signage shall
city.
be replaced and/or installed consistent with the design and the
Exactly.
wayfinding.
The other
And that
thing,
is the number.
does everyone want to see that added?
yeah. And the other thing, do we need to work, that was brought up was lighting. I mean, it's the same thing, right? Is there lighting? I don't even know if there's lighting in the plaza now. I don't even think there may be.
No, I don't
I think rather than splitting it in so many categories, why don't we just add a line item stating that all the city guidelines or standards depend on signage, lighting, things, and which
So-
in my case it should be
That's fine.
somebody will follow it anyways because it's a city standard,
Right.
right? But I'm saying rather than putting it piecemeal in each
That's fine.
line item, just put it separately.
So
That
how
way
would
we're
you
not
propose,
touching.
what language would you propose?
All existing city standards for lighting, signage.
Landscaping.
Shall be maintained, or something like that.
Yeah, just like we did number.
Just to show that there
Just
needs
like
to be
number 8.
thought of, that everything else has got to be
Is
consistent.
this your comment about consistency and uniformity, or is this?
Yeah.
This
No,
is the
this is
one?
it. I'm saying
okay,
just-
so then I
just
would
put it
actually, I think
in one.
we should put in, with the desire to see uniformity and
Consistency in the plazas.
among each of the plazas, though developed separately.
Kind of like
We'd like to see
there you go.
these features for tree planting, irrigation, landscaping, signage, and possibly lighting.
Yeah, I agree. That's like
I think that covers
the
it.
downtown guidelines where it says that we want to create this look and feel, right? Consistently throughout all the plazas.
And the reason
for
I
all the
like to
buildings.
keep it separate because I think if
I agree.
we have really just massaged the other points, so council doesn't have to go in and, depending on how they look at it, they're looking at a separate line item rather than all 9 at the same time.
Okay. Do you think you have enough?
Yeah, we can break that out
Okay.
as the add
Yeah.
to it.
So moving on to the parking stall allocation. Number 1, allocation on a first-come, first-served basis. In my mind, I don't know what this means. I don't know.
I don't
Applicant
think.
would know what this means.
I don't think that the issue for number 1 is about the allocation of the parking spaces. I think it's about which plaza gets restriped needs to be addressed. That if one developer comes in and says, I want to do Plaza 1, and another developer comes in and says, I want to do Plaza 1, that's the first come, first served basis.
But there are two issues here. One relates, this is called parking stall allocation. A different heading may be the issue of, competing bids for the same parking lot, right?
Right.
And what's the basis for, and that's on some sort of first come, first served basis, but maybe that needs more clarification.
Yeah, because right now it reads like the city is restriping it, and whoever comes first, we'll give
Right.
them the extra spaces.
Exactly.
Even though whoever is already doing the project is getting those extra spaces.
Right. Because if you read number 3, I think it is, or, right, it says, the development to use this policy to develop new parking space in the plaza shall be directly adjacent. I mean, that to me, number 3 is talking about, if I go through and I'm going to create a new project and I'm going to restripe to create the parking spaces, those go hand in hand. They're tied together. So it's not first come, first serve, per se. It's,
You have to come forward, a developer needs to have application in for a project, and with that project, they can bring forward a plan to redevelop the plaza to address their parking deficit.
exactly.
And because there's a question of whether you still require on-site parking, right? I mean, and I'm not sure we want to go there,
Right.
but there's an interesting question as to whether somebody can look at restriping as the only solution, or whether there's still there might be a requirement for at least a portion on site, right? But that's I don't know if we want to get into that nuanced discussion about that.
Yeah, maybe there are two
Well,
projects who decide to do it together.
David?
That's dependent on the development application. I mean, it's kind of inherent. I mean, if they're meeting their supply on site, they don't need to do this.
Right.
Or,
Okay.
so their project's going to drive it. I mean, I think.
But there is that first step, which is in order to be considered, somebody has to have a project, and the restriping proposal needs to be tied to the project and the requirements of the project?
Yeah, I mean, that's inherent. And then this policy assumes we have a project, they have a deficit, they're going to meet it by restriping a plaza. Okay. Now, when we do the restriping of the plaza and develop that plan, if there's a surplus, this is how we deal with it and allocate it.
Got it. So it's just that it phrased first, that's what confused us.
We're-
But it's
we're
just coming in
assuming-
as, if there's more left over, then first come, first serve.
Exactly. So then,
But that's what item 2 is about.
so the next so what it's doing is if there is a surplus created,
Exactly.
it's encouraging other people to come to the table
But
rather
one
than
and two-
sit on the
what's-
supply.
But
Because somebody else might.
There's no discussion here about, is the developer being reimbursed for the partial cost of those?
No.
If you look at the preamble at the very beginning,
Giving them all?
there's a specific says, "All costs associated with design, approval, and construction of a public parking plaza reconfiguration shall be borne by the developer."
Right.
Yeah,
I
but if
understand,
somebody else
but it's-
come, can they reimburse them because now they're taking over their
Right.
surplus? I
It
think
seems
that's
to me a fairness issue. If I'm restriping a plaza, I may wind up with 10 spots. I mean, it's because it's simple math. If I
Right.
need only 8 spots, seems to me
They're not
there's a
gonna work
fairness
hard in
issue
getting
that
extra.
somebody else can use those spots. There should be some money changing hands. Now, it shouldn't be at a profit.
You should be
That would be number two.
incentivizing them to maximize rather
Right.
than just to build.
You would then it's assumed if they are developing excess beyond what they need, they would be including a proposal to council. How are we going to handle these? And it would probably be something where they're auctioned off or sold off, and then a price is set or something like that. But they would put forward a proposal because I'm sure they're going to have a cost basis per space or something like that. So I mean that's really the intent of number 2 under parking allocation, which says if there are any parking spaces created above and beyond what the developer needs to meet their project parking demand, the surplus parking may be allocated to a nearby property per approval by the city council.
But-
So the goal is they would put forward a plan, and the council would need to approve that of who gets the credit for those newly created spaces.
But number 1 says they're first come, first serve.
Yeah, but
And that's,
I'm
and that's
reading.
what, to me, that's putting those two together.
So the first come, first serve refers to the proposal. The proposal to reconfigure a plaza, it's a
Right.
first come, first serve basis. Whoever gets their proposal in first, that's the first one that
Yeah,
gets.
like
Right,
two
which is-
projects are in line on the same plaza, but somebody actually officially submits.
Exactly.
That
Which
would
is-
be the first-
Which is why it's not the allocation of the newly
not the
created
allocation
parking.
then.
It's the
Yeah.
actual, that's why I
This
said
is-
that wording is really,
Yeah.
This is the supply that's created. How do you dole out the supply once it's created?
right, but number 1 says,
It's the
That's
first.
number 1. How you allocate the newly created space
but that's what number 2
over and
says.
above the project.
But that's what number 2 says.
No, well,
That's what I
right,
say.
what
1 and
it's
2 go
saying
together.
is, so we have a surplus, now another application comes in, they have a right to ask for that. And it's council's decision whether they get those or not.
Right, that's what I'm
And
saying.
how they get them.
1 and 2 go together.
Yeah, they're,
Yeah.
Right, and rather
because
than
if-
separating, they should be 1 and 2 together.
well, I
And
mean,
if-
all of this goes together, but
But I
Yeah,
mean,
but I
would
think if
put it in the
what we're
same.
trying to say is that if the first one is the first come, first serve, where the project itself is concerned, then the only thing we are having difficulty, and I think I understand, is when it says allocation of newly created public parking space. So the first one we are looking at is, if it's a first come, first serve, it's more like the project itself.
Yeah.
And then the second one is the newly created parking spaces will be
Right.
allocated.
exactly.
So the
Right.
the wording on the first one is what we are having a difficulty with. It's seems like it's the second one, but that's not it is. The first one needs to change. It shouldn't be newly created public parking spaces. It's the restriping of the plazas. So whoever comes first gets the first stab at
Well,
it.
the key is that it's the net increase. We don't want to create a situation where if they restripe the plaza, they get access to all those spaces. It's, you start with a basis, 80 spaces in a plaza, you restripe, you get 90. That 10, they can then use as a credit toward their project. That's the
Okay, so
intent of
that's
that.
not
If you
what-
feel there's a better
But that's
way
not,
to word it,
yeah,
then,
that number 1 is not worded the way I would, even just what you just said, it's like, I understand what you just said, that's the parentheses.
Definitely not communicated.
So if you want to suggest a better way to word it,
Well, I think that what we talked about, one is to say that the restriping of a plaza shall be on a first-come, first-served basis for each, I don't know whether project, the first project that says, I want to restripe Plaza 10, gets to restripe Plaza 10. If another project comes in and says, I want to restripe Plaza 10, then they're behind the first one, and they can work it together or whatever, but that's the issue, right? Which plaza, who gets to restripe which plaza? And that the net impact, and then those stalls, they need to, the current plaza spaces needs to increase
To support.
to support the project that they're dealing with.
Yeah, the first point you made, this policy doesn't, it assumes that if you're coming to the table with your development and proposing a restriping, that's your first come, first serve.
Right,
And you can only benefit from the supply.
Right.
You create. I mean, that's what we mean by that. So,
because the policy as a whole assumes that there's a proposal coming forward. So that's already established. They're now creating new spaces. Number 1 is saying that it's, as per the direction of council, those spaces are allocated first come, first served, meaning the project proponent would be the first served.
so if you read number 2, where it starts off, if there are any extra spaces created above and beyond the developer needs, blah, 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 city council gives these should be allocated on a first come, first served basis. Right?
no, that's where the council has discretion.
Right, but that's why I said, number 1 doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, so, you know what, from a pure construction of English language, I agree with you, Mike, but the reality is, I'm not sure it really matters. And, if staff doesn't want to change it, I'm not sure it's worth,
Oh, no, we're certainly willing
Changing
to
it.
reword it. I mean,
That's fine.
I think we understand
Allocation
that
of newly
we can make this clearer.
Okay.
And I think we understand what the
I think it would need to be clearer.
fusion.
Who has to come with what? Do they have to come
Right.
at what stage?
About the
You want them
project and
to come.
restriping it.
At what
Right.
stage do you want them to come?
Right.
So-
There's part
Number
1, which
two
is,
is clear.
applicants can come forward with a proposal to restripe as part of a development project which is concurrently being submitted to the city.
That should be in the preamble. at the
That's a
very
preamble.
beginning.
Once that happens, that, the right to develop a plaza is therefore based on who submits first basis. Right? Is that the clarity we want?
right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then everything else follows.
And we are okay
And then
with
the
number
allocation of spaces once it's done, the allocation of spaces is on a first because guess what? You're the first project.
Well, it
in
doesn't
line.
matter to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like
Okay.
immaterial because I'm restriping the plaza and it's part of my project. I obviously get it. I don't
Yeah.
know whether we need to say it's first come, first serve. That's
Well, if two people are submitting the project and one is thinking, well, I've already talking to planning since a year, so they're thinking they're first come first, but the other person within a month of talking has actually submitted their application,
right.
that is a formal application, right? So I think
But
that's
it's the
what it is.
restriping of the plaza itself. It's not the additional spaces. It's the plaza.
Correct. So if they come in with the proposal versus the other person was just talking about it, that's the first come first. I mean, they put the money down and they actually made it official.
Right, and that's all part of the preamble.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Number
that
two,
was
we're
the
okay.
intention.
Okay, so what else do we have on this?
All right.
But do we want to? This is the part where number 2 is about like an in lieu program.
Right. Someone suggested that this should, rather than I think the
Number 2.
understanding should be that a developer, expectation should be that a developer is going to allocate the spaces that they just paid for to somebody and be compensated for that. So then the question is, if to avoid a highly inflated sale of that spot, does the city benefit from creating what is suggested in this memo of a parking in lieu program where the property owner pays a fee into the program, which is then refunded to the person who constructed the stalls, so that we don't.
But I think if we shouldn't be so specific, because right now it's saying that it will be per the city council's approval. So it will be coming back to the city. The project person will not be able to just allocate or lottery it out whenever they want to. It'll come back to the city, and at that point, if they think there is a project which is coming forth, they need more or whatever, it can be.
But that's not articulated here. If the council is going to say, we don't want you to sell it for,
Well, they can't. It's public property.
Yeah,
that's
don't confuse who owns the parking
Yeah.
plaza with the.
But why would a
with
developer
the-
allocate something to someone if they're not compensated for the cost? They could just say,
No,
we're
no,
not going to allocate it.
The council allocates it.
They are
So
just going to
once they
stick with
create
their
this-
number
And
of.
the
It's not their spots.
Their compensation
Is
is that
getting
allows
that
them to do
square
the project.
footage.
That's their compensation.
And they got their 10 or 9 or whatever parking spots. As I understand it, the rest is still city property.
No, it's all city property. These will remain public spaces.
Yeah,
The
but-
spaces will never be the province of a project.
Yeah, what I meant was there's still in the city's control the rest of the, leftovers to
All the
allocate
spaces will
wherever.
always be under the city
Thanks for
control.
being-
We'll
But
be approving
if a developer only
project.
needs 7 spots, and we know that there is a range, why don't we want to incentivize them to put in the 10, and they know they're going to get back
The
the cost
3.
of those extra 3 spots?
Sounds good to me.
Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Well,
Ronit, because we're just reviewing what the council put forth here. You're wordsmithing the policy. I mean, you're adding more stuff to the policy.
No, we can.
I think it's a suggestion.
It might be in the category of suggestion of things that we might want to.
So we can say
do.
we are overall in acceptance of this, but we suggest that
well,
this should be
there's
looked
also
at.
an underlying thing, which is that the current parking supply is adequate based on what code is, based on how much retail space, based on all that. And then if I come along and say, I'm going to create office space, I need to have 7 more spaces, that's not to say that we're already, if you did that math, that the number of spaces net of the whole parking plaza is still enough.
Given the cost per stall, I think the likelihood that a developer is going to develop stalls beyond what their project demands, and given the parameters of a 9 by 18 stall, you've got the table in front of you, how many, the potential stalls per plaza. I don't think under these current conditions, there's going to be a situation where we're going to be
Where there's
dealing
a lot
with
of surplus.
excess.
they'll max out
They'll want to
use
build
that.
as much square footage as stalls they have. I mean, with any project that comes forward, we don't see projects that are providing excess parking, or they're building as much as their parking will allow. That's really the controlling factor on every project we see downtown, is the number of stalls that are provided. So
I agree.
I would just preface it with, I don't know how much time you should spend really focusing on this, because we have yet to see a situation where we have a project with excess parking.
But we
And
need-
I know all developers, if they can get that extra space in there, they're going to add the extra square
Yeah,
footage.
but they,
But-
as a practical matter, they have a limitation. I
Right.
mean, on any site, you've got in
There's
State
a
and Main Street, you've
formula.
got 200% FAR.
Right.
I mean, you can't,
I understand, but look at this plaza sizes.
Right, but if I develop Plaza
Within
3
7 million
and I
yourself.
create 17 spaces, but my building only, I can build it, and I put in the extra more, that second story, but I only need 8 spaces because
or you need 16 spaces.
there's I created 17, but I don't need that many.
But don't we want to incentivize them to do the one that creates 17?
Exactly.
Knowing that they're going to get back the cost.
I'm
of
with
the
you.
original.
I'm with you, right?
Nice.
Which is my point
If our
at number
goal is to
2.
maximize parking, then let's
But
treat people
to whom are
fairly.
they going to sell the space?
To the,
To the next project.
Next project that's probably already submitted a request
Oh, wait,
to another
so, wait,
parking
But how do-
spot.
wait. So we've already bought into the proximity thing, right? So
I haven't.
Well, we haven't gotten there.
Yeah, I mean,
How is this going to work? They've redeveloped a plaza, and to suit their own project, they have a few spaces in excess. To whom are they going to sell them? Because the next
to be another
there's-
project
There's
goes
no
by.
way there's no way for another person to redevelop that once the plaza is redeveloped, it's redeveloped. So that means that it can't be done again. So the next building that is going to be built, if we buy into the proximity thing,
But it's one less parking spot to have to put on site. We've had projects where they've put on-site parking, and they're short. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, yes, there are a lot of
Right.
lots on State and Main Street where
Wait.
it's possible to reconfigure
Wait, we
to get underground parking.
that's kind of not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone who redevelops a plaza to meet a parking requirement to increase the size of their building.
Right.
Once that plaza is redeveloped, no matter how many spaces the redevelopment generates, there's going to be no more redevelopment of that plaza.
yeah,
It's done.
but I think we are forgetting something, and staff had mentioned it earlier, and I just remembered because it wasn't very specific. But I remember Zach saying something about that whoever has those extra parking spots would actually be putting a proposal in, and either it gets lotteried out or whatever happens, that the council will decide. Isn't that what?
Yes.
Did I get that understand?
Intent of number 2 is that.
So that gives
council
it
will-
flexible.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the Planning and Transportation Commission will be seeing any project that comes through, and you'll have ample opportunity. If you see that they're not maximizing to include it, it can be a development incentive. And I think the whole way along, obviously, if the money is expended to reconfigure a plaza, the striping of an extra space, there is a cost in that, and so clearly the reconfiguration would maximize per these standards. I think that's inherent in any proposal that comes forward. And if there happened to be an extra space or two, it would definitely be accounted for. And if it's not, you as the commission would have an opportunity to comment on that when the project comes before you. So I guess the question is that a problem that needs to be solved now, or would that automatically work its way out when a project comes forward?
I think I would prefer that people off the bat had an understanding of what they can expect, how they expect to be treated. So if you tell them, come up with this project, and then throw out the idea of getting compensated for it at some late stage, I feel like my suggestion is that it should be an understanding that it is reasonable for a property owner who has surplus parking to be refunded the cost of those stalls if he allocates it to someone else. That is a reasonable
By that someone else, not
expectation
by the city.
that someone from day one should have.
So that would be a
I think that should be
recommendation.
articulated.
So why don't we make that recommendation as number 4, subheading to parking
Yeah.
stall allocation?
Okay.
I think that's.
So-
I think
Because
that's
we
the
have no-
policy. And, as you say, it encourages people, I mean, in some cases, people may not have a choice. Again, you work through the math, and you wind up with 15 spots, whether you need 15 or not. Because some of this is just math. And so if they only need 14, the city's not going to buy it, but if somebody else can use it as part of their
And maybe,
parking requirement,
The only way that can happen is if you don't have the proximity.
no, it can happen because there are projects that we see that come before us where somebody wants to develop their property and they're short, they're going to put 6 spots on site, but they need a total of 7.
John?
A smaller project may come forward
Yeah, but
that'll
that's-
take advantage of that.
If the project is at the corner of First and Main and reconfigures a parking plaza, and then some other projects at the other end of town, the project at the other end of town isn't going to be able to take advantage of the spare spot.
Well, that's item 3.
I'm not convinced that there aren't maybe smaller projects that could benefit from maybe 3 additional spots, so that we won't just see the biggest projects come forward. We may see some, smaller opportunities that would never have been able to come forward because they couldn't possibly afford doing such a
and I think the other thing we should keep in mind that, yes, these are the guidelines and standards we are giving, that it's the plaza which is right next to this project or not. But we all know that when projects come in front of us, people do come up with creative solutions and they do present it. We as Planning Commission always have in our hands, if we think it's the right approach, to say, yes, they're right, we need to give them that. And council can always make that decision.
Okay.
But we need to kind of give at least some guidelines. And I think this is just a fair way of approaching it.
So I would throw out, I'm just going to try to throw out.
So 1 and 2 and 3 we are saying is okay, and we are just,
I would throw out
with the
some-
change of the 1.
No, I'm gonna. We haven't talked to 3 yet. That's all.
I want to talk about 3 too, but a
Okay.
suggested added provision in this section I would throw out is that in order to encourage the development of the larger parking plazas
Maximizing it.
and maximize parking, it is reasonable for a property owner who provides a surplus parking to be refunded. There's probably a better
To be
word.
compensated.
To be refunded the costs of
By whom?
To be reimbursed
On
for
a
their
per-
pro
on a
rata,
per
for their
stall, yeah.
per
By
their
whom?
pro rata
By
cost.
next project. We
Of
can't
each
say by
parking
the
stall.
city.
Yes.
It has to be the next applicant or the next project who's interested in that parking
You can't just
project.
use the words compensated for the,
Refunded.
no. It has to be they are compensated not by the city, but by another.
By the next
by a
applicant.
project
Of
that
course,
potentially.
yes.
But that needs to be in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I
Silent agreement.
I agree with you on that.
Could we just change 2 to say the surplus parking may be allocated and compensated to a nearby or compensated by a nearby property per approval of the city council?
Well, then that would suggest any price, will do. And I would suggest that the person should have an expectation they'd be refunded their actual costs on a per stall basis, as opposed to encouraging this,
To make money off of it.
auction.
Gotcha.
But the other thing is, I personally think that we should leave, if we are in general agreement of that point, number 2, we leave that intact and just add ours.
Okay.
Separately.
A 2A.
Okay.
Or 4.
2A or a 4, whatever, works.
Well, because 3 is a.
No, but then
I wanna-
whatever
I'm gonna
happens
put-
at
put it
3,
closer
then
to
we,
2, right?
we
Yeah, that's
fix
fine.
that.
Okay? I
Sure.
think we articulated something that hopefully, when they review the video,
Yeah.
This stuff is
Makes
going to be
sense.
If not,
scratched.
it'll come back to us in
Yeah.
the form of questions.
So,
Inform
David,
minutes.
Zach, do you guys
Minutes,
understand
yes.
what we're after?
Just adding that point.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was the intent, so clarifying that makes sense. The intent was if there was excess parking, they'll propose a plan as to how it'll be reallocated. Obviously, compensation would be involved because they expended. And I
Exactly.
think that was council's intent, was to address that as well. So I think that's totally
That takes care
understandable.
of that.
Okay.
Okay, then number 3,
So,
location.
so the city council directed, was part of their guidance that the plaza should be adjacent to the project going on. I would like to ask city council to rethink that, because I think that it's limiting development of any, or restriping of a project or a plaza.
So, Mike, I understand. So, but let me pose to you a different question or a related question. which is if an applicant comes in and says, I'm going to build a 3-story office building, and my parking garage, my underground parking garage, my above-ground parking garage is going to be down the street, would we ever approve that?
We may. If the applicant owns that same parcel.
My thought is, I don't disagree with you, Mike. I think that the whole parking plaza is owned as tenants in common by these property owners. They don't own just the one next to them. They are entitled to park anywhere, and so are their customers. And the expectation that you just only park across the street. I mean, I think we have some businesses that have made agreements that are, to park their customers in an area that is not exactly obvious. And we allow that. So
there is a policy right now, and if you look in the city's parking standards, the city code says that you may use a off-site if you want to develop, and this is for another private property.
Right.
As long as it's within 300 feet of your property, it's acceptable. So, if you want to, that could be an option where you're widening the breadth beyond what this number 3 says. So if
should be
parking,
consistent.
as long as a plaza is within 300 feet of your project,
Fine.
Which makes perfect sense to me.
Which is perfectly fine with
Fine,
me.
that's-
But to have one project and have the parking, so far away that nobody would ever park there seems to be.
Yeah, because I'll come back to I agree with the 300 feet, so that's not the question. I know where you both are going with how to share the parking across town. There are a couple of things we should look at. When a project is under construction, we all know what's happening downtown. You don't expect and you don't want another part of the city in destruction either, when these can be done close to each other and the whole traffic and things is impacted right there. One. Second, I'll come back to this. We give standards and guidelines, right? As homeowners, as commercial owners, people can still suggest, and we've done that in the past in all the projects. They can come back and say, hey, you know what? We've done this, but we think if we do this plaza or if we get parking there, it's better for us. Or, for example, the first project goes in and does the plaza and they have some leftover parking, but the other project which is coming in, they say, well, we would like to get that one. They can always present that. And that always comes in front of us and the council. And council always can make that change if it makes a reasonable, logical sense. But I think as base point, I think if you go back to the standards of whatever, the 300, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too, but I will say that my general viewpoint differs in that I think that they should be able to park anywhere, business. And if I think about it in terms of a parking garage, at some point, if the stars get in alignment in this town, we will have a parking garage, and it will be placed in a location. And the vast majority of the property owners that will be contributing to in lieu payments are not going to be adjacent to it. In which case, that is the reality of this town.
All we're doing is increasing our parking supply, and this adjacency
I know, but
thing is weird.
we've come up with the solution that is the most inelegant, and we're making it even more difficult and creating these hurdles as if we don't. We're proposing a solution that it almost feels like we don't really want people to do because we're making it so difficult.
What we're
for them
doing
to
right
do it.
now? No.
If
But
the
would
goal
you
is
be
to
okay with the
maximize
300?
parking, then don't make it don't make every little part of it so incredibly restrictive.
I agree with you.
So in my mind, I would like to see 3 completely stricken, but that's not going to be.
I would
Not
like
up
to
to
just
me.
look at the 300 feet. That has
So
been the standard.
In lieu of being able to strike it, I would say at least it should be consistent. I mean, there should
I would
be
just
some
make it
logic.
I think
consistent
300 feet, and
and just go
David
with that.
or Zach, do we have a way of measuring? Do we?
Yeah,
I do it nearest edge of property to nearest edge of
It's
plaza.
property. Fine.
That's the way when you
That's
do a
fine.
That's how
mailing
you do it.
radius, if it touches any part of the
Fine.
property.
Just so there's no ambiguity in terms
So
of,
if any part of the project is within 300 feet of
feet.
any part of the plaza, that
Bingo.
would be the boundary.
Works for me.
I'm good with that.
Okay, moving on to the review process. Review of a parking plaza reconfiguration proposal shall follow the design and review process and come before the different committees.
I'm
That's
okay
fine.
with that.
It's fine. Application fee shall be submitted.
Yeah.
Anyone object to
No.
that?
No?
Or to number 3 about a deposit?
No. So, but my question is, I mean, Jim Wing has raised a number of questions about sort of the guidelines and, so, do we leave those things for the staff, the applicant to work out?
Yeah, because I think those are guidelines and design guidelines. That's not part of what we are looking at right now. I think they're totally separate things.
So
like,
is there a, again, you know, we're talking,
Yeah.
is there a need for design guidelines to address some of these issues, just as we're talking about the need for guidelines or consistency with regard to the development of one plaza versus another? I mean,
I think that's not in front of us. We can ask that to be in a future agenda item, but I don't think that's in front of us right now. That's my personal take on it.
Just going back to 3, besides 2 of us, does anyone else think that that provision should be stricken? And the only reason I'm asking is if there were a majority of us that did think that, then I think we should at least, we're not going to do it, but we should communicate that the majority of the planning commission.
I would agree to strike it.
So Mike, there's 3 of us. You would not want to, you would want it to be close. And I think you.
Yeah, I think it
And I
makes
want
more
to put- and
practical
I
and
think that
it's a
I
fair.
think
The
price.
300
I
feet
would
is
say-
I think 300 is reasonable.
I think it's reasonable, and I think
I
it's
just don't
still
know
in
how
the
far
council's
300
hand
feet is.
to change it.
I mean, it's right there, 100 yards.
you a hint. It's
I
like
would,
a football field.
I think
I'm
it's
like-
worthwhile at least communicating that the majority of the quorum, that we don't represent a majority of the commission.
So on a 3-2 basis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Felt that should be stricken.
Okay.
That's fair.
You 300 feet, they
So-
can by your house, John.
So I have a question for Zach and
Selling part.
David, and this gets back to what the letter about the standards, right, about electrical cars and alleyways to allow for trucks to deliver and all that. Should that be part of this policy, or is that just a general, this is how we deal with any parking?
But isn't that part of this where we said that the existing circulation should be kept?
Yeah, we would
Nine.
look at it, because
So
some
it's-
plazas have loading zones, others
Yeah.
don't. Electric cars, EV charging stations, we have some, that really should be a citywide policy that would apply to a project, but not incorporated specific for this.
Okay.
So, but talking about maintaining existing circulation is different than saying that, you know, loading zones, existing loading zones and things like that shall not be impacted, as an example. I mean, that.
But how can you be so specific, because each plaza would have a different situation? The wording, if you say that existing circulation should be kept in mind, kind of leaves it open to see particular need of each plaza.
Right, well, I
could-
don't know, I'm raising the question because, you know, one is kind of, you know, here's a guideline, and the other is, you know, you've got businesses who, if you made certain changes, might increase parking, but it's really going to wreak havoc on that business and the UPS truck and the FedEx truck and the delivery trucks that depend upon, you know, those alleyways and the driveways for access.
So I think that's kind of covered, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we could be more
It was-
specific to include existing loading zones and circulation patterns shall be considered. Because obviously, we don't want to fix it, because maybe there's a better solution for how those loading zones can be allocated.
So
but they should
I would
definitely
rather
be
say
considered.
that, you know, that they'll be respected or they'll be, you know, taken into consideration.
Taken into consideration.
So that it doesn't feel as though, oh, well, you know, somebody makes a judgment call saying, well, you know, I think this is a reasonable trade-off. You know, we get rid of that and, you know, we get 10 more spots. Well, you may, but you've basically put 3 businesses out of business because they can't get deliveries.
Existing vehicle flow patterns, in our mind, is all-inclusive.
Okay.
That includes the flow, and which includes loading, and I mean, in some
Pedestrian,
places where you have yellow curb, you're going to need a wider aisle, so if a delivery vehicle's there, cars can get around them. Those would all be part of the circulation pattern that we would definitely consider.
Okay. And this is just a nomenclature issue, because for me, that's not what comes to mind. But,
Right.
And again, I think this hopefully should serve as a good communication tool, not only to the council, so that when the council looks at it, they're clear on what it really meant, because ultimately projects will come to them, but they're going to be future planning commissions. Our goal is to see applicants actually use this, and making sure it's clear to the applicant that, this is what we really meant, and so that there's clarity. So I'm in favor of making sure the words are clear.
I mean, because any proposal that comes before you, you'll be seeing what exists now and what's being proposed, and we would be looking at all elements of how that plaza functions as part of that. I think that's inherent in the process.
What we're asking is just, could you say what you just said in that, and just, maybe it's a parentheses.
Existing vehicle flow and delivery patterns.
Deliveries, exactly.
Loading zones.
Loading zones, just all that, just as a parentheses, or just something that said, this is all the things you guys should think about when you say travel patterns, because I was just thinking going up and down aisles, not even thinking about.
But that's the difference, right? If you start being so specific, you have pedestrian stuff happening there also.
Well, I'm just saying, for example, right?
Yeah, just
for example,
because then you
loading
can't
zones,
be really just.
exactly.
So, I mean, if we looked at number 5, so it says a plaza reconfiguration proposal should consider the transitions between adjacent parking plazas and align to make all feasible efforts to maintain existing vehicle flow patterns, loading zone areas, and pedestrian circulation flow, or something like that?
Pedestrian access, pedestrian circulation. I don't know. I don't know what's appropriate here.
Bicycle.
I mean, the goal is that it's all, we're going to be looking at this all-inclusive and how,
Exactly.
look
But
at
I
the
just kind
overall
of want to get people
flows.
that it's not just the cars going.
That's on their radar.
But by doing it as a, for example, you're not limiting.
Right.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You're not limiting because there's.
But you're also setting expectations so people understand who aren't here today what's expected.
So we'll look at that to adjust it to make sure that it's conveyed that it's an all-inclusive evaluation of the circulation of that lot, including deliveries, including vehicles, including pedestrians, maybe something like that.
Exactly.
Et cetera. So that way we're just looking at the overall circulation.
Right, just to
of
give
all
people an
modes.
idea of things to think about.
Okay, Renee.
Okay. Any other comments about this?
So what are we doing?
We just gave our
I think
suggestions
we
and
did.
moved
We
it
went
forward.
line by line
And so
with
we
suggestions.
We went word by word.
Are we now making a
So-
recommendation to council?
Letter by letter.
We
are
considered
also
the
putting in-
policy.
I think it needs to be rewritten and before we can approve.
Yeah.
Is that what
Again.
needs to happen? Is that it's going to get approved by us to go to city council for them to adopt?
Well, it'll go back to them for consideration. Their position was they weren't committing to adopt it. They were saying, we feel there's enough merit to move forward and look at this, start with the PTC and bring something forward, and then we'll.
Right, so we're
But
not
aren't we going to get to see
the next version.
the next version?
That's what we're saying.
They were looking for input from the PTC. I mean,
Are you saying you want this to come back to us before it goes back to the city council?
That's
I
what
would
I'm
think so,
saying.
yes.
I mean, I don't know that there was enough substantive changes that you.
We've added
wanna-
separate line items.
You've provided your recommendations.
Okay. Zach,
I mean, I trust
how about,
staff too.
Can we cut a deal here? Can we talk? How about you email us the revised copy?
We can't write it. It has to
Can
be
we do that?
public comments.
Well, it'll be in part.
We can
To make sure
we can
you're-
prepare it and then receive to make sure we're capturing it.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
that's
all.
That's all.
That's all we're
That's all
saying.
it is.
I don't want to go through another meeting like this, but we just.
Why, this was so much fun.
So if we have comments, we need to email him individually.
Not reply all.
group.
Yeah, and don't hit reply all, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
They'll blind copy us on it.
No, but that's, before it goes to city council, because I don't want to go
That's the
to find on the agenda for city council is your staff
Right.
report and going, well, this is not what we talked about.
Exactly,
I
that's,
can just see the
Yeah, so
fun of
each
all
of
of
you
our
will give us
comments coming
we'll get you the
separately.
draft. Each of you individually will send it back to us, and
Say it looks
we will
great.
try to synthesize, because I'm assuming your comments might not.
Correct.
all-
I was
Or we
about
might
to
just
say,
say-
we're going to have fun at
We
that.
might just say, it looks great,
yeah.
right? I
Which-
mean, that's what
which-
we hope.
Given your competency, I'm sure that's what will happen.
They're making sure that you listen to the video in
Yeah.
detail.
We are doing our very best to reflect.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
on to
With
the
that,
next
I think
issue.
we
What is the
can
next
move
subject?
to the commissioners' reports and comments. Anyone have a report?
I do.
I do.
Great.
What's your report?
My report is on Tuesday, March 25th. I attended the city council meeting because I wasn't here at the last.
March 25th?
Yeah, I wasn't.
That was a zillion years ago.
But I wasn't here. This is the first meeting I've had since that meeting that I've been here, and because there was only one meeting and everything else was canceled for the last two. That the public parking plaza reconfiguration is the topic of the council,
How did that work out?
and it's to be reviewed by the PTC.
You know,
I'm glad you told us.
your,
Now we know.
You're so timely, Mike.
your inputs are just,
I also want to mention that State Street Green is going to be looked at happening again between Third Street on Third Street between Main Street and Plaza.
I love that.
At the end of it's at the end, like the middle of July to August. It was to be
Oh,
determined.
that's
That was
cute.
the
I
other
love
thing
that.
that was brought up.
It was so much fun.
Less activities, or just open space.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Renee talked about the 2014 Planning Commissioner Academy I went to.
Go ahead.
And it was really interesting and really informative. And the best thing I thought, there were a lot of interesting concepts discussed. David was there as well. It was fun to share time with him, as well as Councilmember Pepper. But the interesting thing was the closing of the session, which was the future of transportation by Peter, I don't even, no, I'm sorry, by Tony Seba, who talked about how we're on the verge of a major shift in transportation based on technology that's existing and coming into being. And he said within 10 to 15 years, the way we view parking, the way we view cars is going to be different. It's much like what he said at the beginning of the turn of the century, when horses were the major factor of how every city had to deal with manure and all these things.
was
and
it
then,
hard to park the horses?
and 15 years later, there was no horses.
Really?
Yeah.
They couldn't back the horses into the stalls?
Exactly. And that was just pretty much the thing, that with electric cars and self-guiding cars and all the sensors.
We may not need a parking garage.
We may not need a parking
We
garage.
wait long enough.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's wait.
So I found that really interesting. I don't know. It was really informative.
So I have a report on the city council meeting, which was this Tuesday, which is unusual that council and the planning commission are on the same weekly schedule, which I'm sure wreaks havoc with staff. You guys, I feel sorry for you guys. So the two things were on the agenda of interest. One was the issue of polls for development and renderings, and the council heard a report from James Walgren, and the feedback was we probably need to do more and better, not only about communicating to the public, so these little signs that go up on a commercial project may not be sufficient, so there was councils looking into
Those little balloon man.
making that noticing larger, but also the adequacy of the photo simulations and renderings,
Right.
and it's coming back to the Planning Commission for recommendation
Now we know in advance.
in terms of what and how many and which views, and all sorts of good stuff like that. And it wasn't clear to me, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, the notion of anything else in terms of more technology wasn't on the table, per se.
Yeah, I'm going to have to confer with the director on that.
Yeah.
I didn't attend the meeting, but I
Okay.
know council added that to our work plan.
Right,
Right.
so it got added
So
to.
we're gonna get that together
Right.
and put that on your agenda.
So, and then the only other thing of interest is the council was going through talking about their plan to go around and view the good, bad, and the ugly, which the date has yet to be confirmed, but it will probably be sometime in the fall. And the plan is to have members of the public, and I think the planning commission members, outside their role, qualify as members of the public, to go around with the council, and at each project stop, sort of people offer their comments and then hold a session at City Hall to then give people the opportunity who either didn't come along or who want to give their overall impressions. And there were some good suggestions made to give people sort of a checklist as to, so what are the things you should be looking at, or
Rated.
what are the points that you
Right.
might want,
good.
is this too tall? What are the setbacks, right? So it's really to get specific comments from people on projects. So it's something like 6 or 7 different projects, major commercial projects in the downtown that they're going to look at, so.
And I like Councilmember Fishpaw's suggestion of looking at something that had been built a long time ago, just to kind of compare new development with certain things that are in town that have been there for a long time.
I think this
Yeah.
will be the best thing you all can
absolutely.
do.
I think,
From
I think
paper to
it'll,
reality.
it may not be conclusive, but it certainly will provide some
Education.
feedback in terms of what we do as a city going forward.
Okay.
So that's what I got.
Any future agenda items? No?
Not at
All right.
this time.
Good job, Ronit.
I love short meetings with
I don't know if this qualifies as a short meeting.